Chapter 258, Grand Matriarch Phoenix. 3 heaven pearl leaves, dust wind root, 9 stalks, 60-year-old spirit flow sap. Meng Hao listed off nearly 100 medicinal plant varieties. Zhou Dekun immediately retrieved them and handed them over. The earthly fire crystal blazed explosively, and the floating pill furnace immediately turned bright red. A strong medicinal aroma wafted out from the 10,000 refinements furnace. Meng Hao fed the medicinal plants into it according to the proper interactions. He put them in carefully, making sure not to waste anything. Then he sliced a cut onto his finger and placed a drop of his blood into the pill furnace. He exercised utmost control over the concoction process, which ended up taking 3 days. After 3 days, a bright red medicinal pill emerged. Without hesitation, Meng Hao placed it into the young man's mouth. As soon as the pill entered, his body convulsed. He didn't scream, but as he shook, a blank look filled his eyes. The struggle intensified, lasting the time it takes an incense stick to burn. Finally, his body vibrated and went still. He lowered his head and didn't move. After 10 breaths, a gruesome chi spread from his body. Finally, he lifted his head. The blank look was gone, replaced by somberness. "Many thanks, Grandmaster," said the young man slowly. His gratitude was spoken with incredible arrogance, as if he were giving alms to a beggar. He rose and strode out, ignoring Meng Hao. Zhou Dekun frowned with displeasure. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever, but inside, he laughed coldly. It seemed that balance had been restored between the young man's body and the discarnate soul inside. However, because of the drop of Meng Hao's blood, he now had the ultimate power. If necessary, he could directly destroy the discarnate soul. A single drop of the blood of a demon sealer can thoroughly exterminate a discarnate soul. Patriarch Violet Siv, the beautiful woman, and the ruddy-faced old man waited at the bottom of Black Welcoming Peak. When they saw him, they breathed heavily and quickly bowed. "Congratulations on your recovery, minor patriarch." Of course, they'd sealed the area from all eyes. The young man glanced at the nascent soul cultivators. "That otherworldly corpse which fell from the sky has really caused some problems. In fact, our Lord is once again in deep slumber because of it. We're back in the world of men, but we still haven't accomplished the task ordered by our Lord. However, you 3 did well to make use of that person. After all, he was able to facilitate my recovery. Now, we still have a chance. Arrange for the discarnate souls of the other patriarchs to come. As for the one who contains Grand Matriarch Phoenix, well, no mistakes can be made with her. If there are no problems with the others, send her as well." Having finished speaking, the young man's body flickered, transforming into a black smoke which then disappeared, melting back into the earth. Patriarch Violet Siv and the others reverently saluted him as he departed. Then they stood and exchanged bitter glances. With that, they left, arranging for the other 12 people to be sent to Meng Hao, one at a time. Time passed slowly. Meng Hao treated one after another of the so-called minor patriarchs. As of now, Black Welcoming Peak had become a very important place in the Black Civ sect. Whatever requests Meng Hao made were met immediately. Of course, how could he not make use of this opportunity? All he had to do was say the name of a medicinal plant, and it would be delivered to him. Many of the ingredients he needed for the perfect gold core gradually began to fill his bag of holding. Seeing what was happening, Zhou Dekun began to grow a bit envious and also began to request some medicinal plants. As they concocted pills, they both slowly began to reap rewards. In this way, Meng Hao was also able to collect quite a few sets of 3 generations of blood. They had nothing to do with the pills he was concocting. They were required to create blood clones, and he would naturally not lose out on an opportunity for that. If blood was not available from a given ancestor, Meng Hao wouldn't press the issue. He would just extend the time spent concocting the pill. Finally, one day, the pale-faced Zhou Jai entered the building. This was the first time Meng Hao had seen him since that incident when he first arrived at the Black Civ sect. Zhou Jai sat down cross-legged. Meng Hao said nothing for a moment, then began to concoct the pill. After Zhou Jai left, Han Bei arrived. She had a cautious look on her face. When she sat down in front of him, Meng Hao looked at her and then chuckled. "Grandmaster Fang," she said with a smile. Suddenly, she felt very nervous. The voice of the Han clan patriarch suddenly rang out in her mind. "Be careful of this person. He is complicated and most likely is able to sense my presence." This was not the first time she had heard something like this from the ancestor. The reason she had been nervous the first day she met Fang Mu outside of the Black Civ sect was because of the voice of the Han clan patriarch. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever. He smiled, then began to concoct. When the pill came out, Meng Hao looked over at Han Bei. Her expression was also the same as usual. However, her heart was trembling. Inside her mind, the trembling voice of the Han clan patriarch could be heard. "That pill, you must not consume it, this person, he." "Grandmaster Fang," she said softly, rising to her feet calmly. "I'll take the pill away and consume it later." Meng Hao turned to Zhou Dekun, clasped hands and said, "Elder brother Zhou, I have a small personal matter I wish to discuss alone with fellow Taoist Han." Zhou Dekun laughed. He had long since sensed that something was amiss. However, having been able to collect so many medicinal plants in the past days, he paid it no heed and immediately left the building. Seeing Zhou Dekun leave, Han Bei's heart trembled. "Grandmaster Fang," she said, keeping her expression the same as always, like a flower. She was about to continue speaking when Meng Hao interrupted her. "If you don't want to consume the pill, very well. In that case, however, you will owe me a favor that must be repaid at some point in the future." He looked at Han Bei with a profound look that seemed to penetrate deep into her mind. Han Bei looked back at him and gritted her teeth. She was full of schemes, but right now couldn't think of any way out. A blank look appeared in her eyes. "Grandmaster Fang," she said, "I don't quite understand what you mean, but I suppose I can agree to this favor." "I don't need a favor from you," replied Meng Hao coolly, "but rather the third soul that exists within your body." The words entered Han Bei's ears like a thunderbolt. Her expression immediately changed completely. She was about to say something when, suddenly, a blue chi emerged from the top of her head. It congealed above her into the shape of a man. He stared at Meng Hao for some time before finally nodding. "The Han clan owes you a favor," he said in an archaic voice. Meng Hao clasped hands and saluted. The figure disappeared and Han Bei stared at Meng Hao, an expression of shock and fear on her face. After a long moment passed, she turned and left as quickly as possible. Before leaving the building, she collected herself, then caused a cold, somber look to shine in her eyes. As far as any outsider could see, there was nothing unusual about her. Soon, she disappeared off into the distance. A month of pill concocting went by until finally, the Black Sieve sect sent the last person to Meng Hao. It was none other than Su Qing. Based on all of Meng Hao's experiences, the fact that she was the last to be sent was very telling. The discarnate soul inside of her must be someone not to be trifled with in the Black Sieve sect, someone of utmost seniority. Just as Meng Hao had suspected, as soon as she arrived, things immediately changed around Black Welcoming Peak. The protective shield protecting the mountain grew stronger, and countless discarnate souls circled around up in the air. All of them seemed to be looking down toward Black Welcoming Peak. Seeing all of this, Meng Hao's heart sank a bit. However, the feeling didn't show on his face. He watched Su Qing slowly enter the building and sit down cross-legged in front of him. She looked calm, and there was much less blankness in her eyes. Meng Hao looked at her, glanced at the wound on her forehead, then activated his Furnace Lord shield. His face was the same as usual, but as he concocted the pill, he put in, not a normal drop of blood, but a drop of blood from his cultivation base. Such blood contained the essence of his life force, including his identity as the ninth demon sealer and the persistence of his will. It entered the pill and joined the various interactions. Furthermore, Meng Hao used some of the power of the meat jelly to ensure that no clues would spill out. When the concocting was done, he held the pill out to Su Qing. She picked it up with her delicate hands but didn't consume it. "So this is the pill which helped everyone to recover," she said, her voice cold as she looked at Meng Hao. Without waiting for his response, she rose to her feet and strode out of the building. Meng Hao watched her leave, then sat there thinking silently. He was certain that although she didn't consume the pill in his presence, she would soon. This was because, although she appeared to be in the process of self-recovery, it was actually just a front. The problems with the discarnate soul in her body far exceeded those of the others he had seen, by at least 2 or 3 times. In fact, her situation was the most grave he had seen so far. This was evident by the fact that the wound on her forehead was much worse than when he'd seen it the first time. The next day at evening within the 7th mountain of the Black Sieve sect, Su Qing sat cross-legged within her immortal's cave. Her face was pale white, and her eyes filled with both struggle and blankness. Her body trembled. She continued in this way for several hours before finally lifting up her hand from her bag of holding. Inside was the medicinal pill concocted by Meng Hao. The process of lifting it up to place into her mouth took nearly 10 breaths. If Meng Hao were here, he would be able to see multiple discarnate souls drifting around her body. All of them were staring nervously at Su Qing as they flew to and fro. In fact, outside, All of the Black Sieve sect disciples who Meng Hao had saved, including Zhou Jai and Han Bei, kneeled before the immortal's cave, bowing respectfully. It seemed as if they were waiting for a summons to enter. Su Qing still held the pill in her hand. After a long moment passed, the gruesome coldness in her eyes overcame the blankness and struggle, the discarnate soul inside of her side. She knew that because of the injury to the soul, balance couldn't be restored in this body. She was fading, and the original soul of the body was also fading. The body's life force was disappearing, and the wound on her forehead was growing worse. She knew that if she put things off any longer, the body would begin to decay. Originally, she had never believed that consuming medicinal pills created in this world could lead to recovery. However, seeing the recovery of all the other discarnate souls caused her to question her view. After studying the pill for some time, she was unable to unlock its mysteries. Therefore, she decided that she had no other choice than to consume it. She placed the pill into her mouth. This chapter was sponsored by Dante Madat, Michelle Blanco, Hung Lai, Gonzalo Sebastian Carnibale Cabrera, Andres Bomanis. Chapter 259. I Want to Watch You Fade into the Distance. As soon as the pill entered and began to dissolve, Meng Hao's blood emitted a crimson glow. At the same moment, matriarch Phoenix within Su Qing's body began to shake. A sense of life-or-death danger appeared, but before she could act, a frightening aura submerged her, making it impossible to warn anyone outside. Suddenly, Su Qing's soul, previously in slumber, was infused with red glow, nourishing her and allowing recovery. Matriarch Phoenix was suppressed by the blood of a demon sealer, allowing Su Qing to rise from weakness, whereupon soul consumption began within the body. This soul consumption had been Meng Hao's goal all along. He wanted Su Qing to be able to do what Han Bei had done, fuse the discarnate soul, make it her own. Such a fusion would be undetectable by the Black Sieve sect and the other discarnate souls. No one would be able to tell who truly held mastery over the body. One in the midst of the other, a dangerous rebirth. As Su Qing raised the pill to her mouth, Meng Hao sat cross-legged in his residence. When it entered her mouth, his eyes opened, filled with brilliant light. The blood in his pill came from deep within, so he could sense what was happening. The meat jelly's ever-changing forms really are hard to penetrate. Meng Hao rubbed his face, then slowly lifted his hand. Within it was a jade bottle. Inside the jade bottle was a medicinal pill. This was a pill he had concocted back in the Violet Fate sect, before coming to the Black Sieve sect. The pill bottle was sealed with wax and hadn't been opened. Originally, he had planned to give it to Su Qing, but up until now, hadn't had a chance to. He looked at the pill bottle and then closed his eyes. Early the next morning, Meng Hao walked out of his residence. Immediately, the disciple guarding Black Welcoming Mountain turned and saluted him. Please deliver this pill bottle to fellow Taoist Su Qing. She requested me to concoct it when she visited. He handed the bottle to the cultivator. Because of Su Qing's standing in the sect, he felt it unlikely anyone would open it. Even if someone did, they wouldn't understand. A few days passed. On the 7th day, Zhou Dekun kept saying that they needed to leave. Meng Hao could delay no further. He left the mountain peak, flying up to join the impatient Zhou Dekun. There were no problems whatsoever between him and Zhou Dekun. The alchemy lectures were over, as was the pill concocting. The invitation period from the Black Sieve sect had long since expired. There really was no reason to stay behind any longer. Meng Hao had had no other choice than to give in to Zhou Dekun's prompting. At the moment, a large group from the Black Sieve sect escorted Meng Hao and Zhou Dekun out. Patriarch Violet Sieve was among them, very courteous as they proceeded. As for the pill bottle, Meng Hao was right. No one dared open it. It was delivered to Su Qing's meditation area, received by a girl with grim eyes. She scanned it with divine sense and found nothing special about the pill inside. Yet, she didn't dare open it. She knew Matriarch Phoenix's personality. A mere thought from her could exterminate her instantly. A trifling pill wasn't worth such risk. The girl paid it little attention. Finally, the door of Su Qing's immortal's cave opened. As the sunlight poured in, the girl lifted her head up and then strode into the immortal's cave. Catching sight of Su Qing sitting there cross-legged, she dropped to her knees and kowtowed. Congratulations on your recovery, Matriarch Phoenix. Su Qing said nothing. The girl didn't dare to lift her head and as such, didn't notice the blank look which appeared in Su Qing's eyes, followed by surprise. After a few moments passed, Su Qing stood up. She wore a long greenish-blue robe and her features were cold. As she left the immortal's cave, she coolly said, "Rise." The girl took a deep breath and then quickly rose to her feet. carefully following Su Qing out of the immortal's cave. Su Qing looked up at the azure blue sky and the bright sun, and the strange expression in her eyes slowly faded away and turned into coldness. Deep within this coldness, however, was emotion, something only she was aware of. "Please call over the other 12 Black Clan souls," said Su Qing, her voice cool. The girl immediately nodded and was about to leave, when she suddenly hesitated. "Yes," said Su Qing, the coldness in her eyes glistening as she looked at the girl. The girl's body trembled, and she quickly said, "Grand Matriarch Phoenix, a few days ago alchemist Fang Mu delivered this pill bottle. He said you had requested a pill to be concocted." For some reason, the girl felt as if Grand Matriarch Phoenix was now even colder than she had been before. She retrieved the pill bottle from her bag of holding and held it out. Su Qing's expression was calm as she looked at the pill. Inwardly, though, her heart trembled and her breathing grew rapid. She made a snatching motion, and the pill bottle flew into her hand. She unsealed the wax and poured the pill out of the bottle. It was an ordinary medicinal pill, worth very little. However, despite its relative lack of worth, it caused an enormous storm of emotions to rise in her heart. This was none other than a cosmetic cultivation pill. She stared in shock at the medicinal pill. "Which mountain is he located in?" said Su Qing, closing her eyes to recover her grim coldness. The soul fusing wasn't complete at the moment, and her mind was still a bit conflicted and filled with confusion. "Black Welcoming Peak," replied the girl. Even before she could finish speaking, Su Qing took a step forward and then disappeared. Meng Hao and Zhou Dekun stood smiling outside the main gate. Patriarch Violet Civ and the others bowed. Meng Hao and Zhou Dekun declined further escort. After exchanging formalities, they prepared to leave. At that instant, a bright beam shot through the air with indescribable speed. It emerged from the 100 mountains, whistling through the air, ripples radiating out. A roaring sound filled the air, twisting Patriarch Violet Civ's face. He spun to look at the approaching beam. Within a breath, Su Qing appeared in midair, wearing her long greenish-blue robe. Her grim, cold gaze swept the crowd and came to rest on Meng Hao. Her heart pounded. The world seemed to disappear around her, forming a haze, except for one space. "This look is because I want to catch another fleeting glimpse of your figure within the crowd. This look is because I want to always be able to see you. This look is because I want you to know I've watched over you this whole time." Meng Hao smiled as he looked at Su Qing. She was immeasurably cold, but he was used to that. His smile contained happiness. Within his eyes was warmth. Their gazes met, Meng Hao's smile and Su Qing's coldness. Only they knew how their gazes reached into each other's hearts. He knew she understood. She knew the person standing before her was Meng Hao. It was the same look they'd shared outside the blessed land, like the smile beneath moonlight in the Reliance sect, like the time Meng Hao had turned to look at her on Mount Daqing. This was not the place for words, yet there was no need. The emotions of their separation dwelt in their eyes. A look expressed all the joy in their hearts. "I'll escort you," said Su Qing coolly. "Many thanks, fellow Taoist Su," said Meng Hao with a smile, clasping hands and lowering his head. Zhou Dekun stared in shock for a moment. Patriarch Violet Civ and the others also gaped. They knew who Su Qing really was, and they also knew that her presence here far, far exceeded that of their own. Su Qing ignored them, having eyes only for Meng Hao. The three of them left. Far outside the Black Civ sect, Meng Hao and Su Qing stood atop a tall mountain peak, looking at each other. Zhou Dekun tactfully waited some distance away. "Thank you," said Su Qing softly. Meng Hao shook his head and looked toward the Black Civ sect. Su Qing waved her hand, ghastly coldness filling her eyes. She turned and her voice echoed into the emptiness. "Any soul within 30,000 meters will be instantly exterminated." As she spoke, a ghastly aura echoed out. Meng Hao immediately sensed countless discarnate souls fleeing at top speed. An instant later, no souls remained. Time passed as they stood in the early morning air atop the mountain, speaking simple words, smiling, listening. Neither seemed willing to part. In the past, they had been friends in the same sect. Later, they met in the Black Civ sect blessed land. Now here they were, meeting again in the outside world. All of these things melded together deep in Meng Hao's heart, as well as Su Qing's. Her expression was cold, but her heart was filled with joy. Within her seemingly cold pupils could be seen a touch of warm light. No matter how his appearance had changed, the person in front of her was still her junior brother Meng Hao. As soon as she had realized that Fang Mu was Meng Hao, her heart had begun to pound. There were so many things she wanted to tell him, but as soon as he looked at her, she felt like she didn't have any words to speak. The fact that he hadn't left the southern domain, that he was a furnace lord of the Violet Fate sect. This was enough. As soon as she saw the cosmetic cultivation pill, she completely understood everything. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but Meng Hao's figure had at some point become deeply ingrained into her. He was now a part of her very heart, a part that would never leave her. No matter how many years passed that tried to wash clean the memory, as long as she thought back, she could see that faint smile. The years could not wash it away, so it grew deeper, to the point where she didn't need to think back. She just kept moving forward because she knew that one day the two of them would meet again and would walk together amidst the snow and wind. Soon, moonlight caressed the branches of the willow trees, and the sky began to turn slightly violet. The mountain breeze lifted Su Qing's long, black hair to cover her face. The sight of it filled Meng Hao with warmth and a slight smile. The smile appeared on his face, but came from his heart. It was faint, but like water. It was something her life could never do without. "Go," she said softly. "I want to watch you fade into the distance." This chapter was sponsored by Audiobook. Chapter 260, 5 Years Without a Fight. As Meng Hao disappeared into the moonlight, he looked back at Su Qing on the mountain peak. Memories of time spent with her filled his mind. The first pill he'd given her in the Reliance sect, the cosmetic cultivation pill outside her cave, her voice beneath the moonlight, their time in the blessed land, and now. It seemed as if many stories lay therein. Meng Hao wasn't sure if this was romantic love. The feelings now were things he'd never felt, never experienced. What he knew was that every time he saw Su Qing, happiness welled up from deep in his memories. It was a good feeling. During his 5 years in the Violet Fate sect, he'd thought most often of cold Su Qing standing beneath the moonlight, her black hair floating in the wind. I wonder what it would be like. If the Reliance sect were still there, if the Black Civ sect hadn't taken her away, what if we were still back in the Reliance sect? Meng Hao looked forward. The moonlight shone on his back as he proceeded into the distance. Such questions had no answer. He drew further and further away. 2 days later, a pair of prismatic beams shot through the air toward the teleportation portal to the barren mountains. They were Meng Hao and Jade, now heading back to the sect after completing their task. After leaving the Black Civ sect, Jade had cleared his throat. "Ai, you should get out of the sect more and make friends with these cultivator clans. How about this? I'll take you to meet some on our way to the portal." Looking sorrowful, he'd continued, "We're furnace lords holed up in the sect. Concocting pills takes vast resources, and what you earn in the sect isn't enough. So, Fang Mu, whenever you're sent out, don't hurry back. Spend time outside. They have wealth and are perfect companions for alchemists." Meng Hao nodded approvingly. After the Black Civ sect events, the hard feelings between him and Jade had vanished. They now had a good relationship. Thus, Jade spent about half a month taking Meng Hao to various cultivator clans and mid-sized sects, where they were received with great ceremony. Everywhere they went, they were treated with utmost respect. Seeing Jade's pretentious bearing amongst the clans made Meng Hao smile. Whatever they needed was met. Whenever they sold pills, spirit stones flowed into their bags. That made Meng Hao's eyes shine. During the half-month, he sold quite a few pills. Actually, most of the pills he had sold were ones he had acquired from Chen Jiaxi. Finally, half a month later, Meng Hao and Jade neared the teleportation portal to the Barren Mountains. The Barren Mountains were located near the center of the southern domain, a major intersection between sects and clans. Because of this portal, it had become a centralized travel hub. In a valley in the east of the Barren Mountains was a location that usually bustled with activity. Now, however, it could only be described as gruesome. The reek of blood filled the air, and the ground was littered with corpses. Searching through the corpses for bags of holding were a few dozen cultivators who wore black robes and white masks. Occasionally, they would encounter someone gasping their last breaths and would immediately run them through with a sword. Beyond the black-robed cultivators was a black iron cage, several meters tall. Considering the cage floated in the air and emanated a mysterious glow, it was obviously a magical item. Inside the cage were 2 cultivators. Their faces were pale and they were both unconscious. They were splattered with blood and were clearly seriously injured, but not dead. A faint aroma of medicinal pills emanated off of them. They were obviously alchemists. One of them wore a long green robe, which was embroidered with a pill furnace, marking him as an alchemist of the World Pill Division. Not too far away, 3 cultivators were locked in magical combat in midair. Ripples spread out through the air. This was not the magic of the nascent soul stage. However, the level of power made it obvious that they were not foundation establishment cultivators, but rather core formation. Of the 3 core formation cultivators, 2 wore black clothes and azure masks. Their attacks were vicious. They were only of the early core formation stage, but were clearly beyond normal. As they attacked, booms filled the valley. "Who are you?" roared the besieged core formation cultivator. "I'm from the Golden Frost sect." Blood sprayed from his mouth as he shot backward. There was no response to his question. Of the 2 azure-masked cultivators, one was pudgy, the other skinny. They advanced forward, their attacks growing even more vicious. It was at this exact moment that suddenly, one of the 3 teleportation portals in the valley began to glow. As soon as the glow rose up, the group's several dozen cultivators with black robes and white masks began to close in on the portal. The glow of teleportation lasted for the space of a few breaths, and then slowly began to disappear. 2 figures appeared, Meng Hao and Zhou Dekun. Zhou Dekun was laughing and saying something to Meng Hao. "I have a good relationship with several of the cultivator clans in the Barren Mountains. Next, I'm going to take you to." Meng Hao was smiling, but in an instant his expression immediately changed. Even as the teleportation was completing, before he and Zhou Dekun could see anything on the outside, a sense of danger rose up within him. Before he could speak, the sense of danger rose to the heavens. Meng Hao's face changed. He flicked his left sleeve, and a wild wind sprang up, rippling toward Zhou Dekun and knocking him to the side. Borrowing some of the momentum, Meng Hao's body snapped like a willow branch off at another angle. Meng Hao and Zhou Dekun flew off into opposite directions. Almost in the same instant that they left the teleportation portal, a boom filled the air as the combined magical might of the dozens of cultivators slammed down onto it. As the boom echoed out, Meng Hao shot backward 9 meters, both hands flashing incantation gestures, and then waving out in front of him. Popping sounds rang out as the incoming power of the dozens of cultivators dissipated. Zhou Dekun's face flickered. After being pushed off of the teleportation portal by Meng Hao, his right hand flickered in an incantation sign and then slammed into the ground. A great beam of light shot out from his body, blocking the power of the magical attack. Despite being of the late Foundation establishment stage, blood sprayed from his mouth. His eyes filled with astonishment and fury as he looked at his attackers. Meng Hao's eyes filled with a cold glow. It had been a long time since he engaged in battle magic with anyone. During his 5 years in the Violet Fate sect, he hadn't made even a single attack against anyone. However, his skill in battle magic and his ability to kill had by no means been reduced. In fact, his 5 years of hibernation had made him even stronger. Some of that had to do with the Tao of Alchemy and the Tao of Poison. During the past 5 years, he had concocted no small amount of poisons. Killing intent flickered in his eyes as he looked at the dozen or so cultivators in black robes and white masks. The instant he saw them, he could sense the intense killing intent radiating off of them. He saw the corpses laying around on the ground and the 2 people in the cage. He also could see the battle going on in the air off in the distance. He didn't hesitate at all. His right hand slapped his bag of holding, and the 2 wooden swords flew out. Their sword aura flared up. They had been kept in silence for a very long time, and now that they were out, a massive killing intent boiled up. This caused most of the black-robed cultivators to turn their heads toward Meng Hao. "How dare you?" roared Zhou Dekun. "I'm a Furnace Lord of the East Pill Division. You." He hadn't personally engaged in magical combat for a very long time. Ever since becoming a Furnace Lord, he had trodden a path filled with courtesy and respect. Yet just now, even before he could step off of the teleportation platform, he had been the victim of a sneak attack. Before Zhou Dekun could even finish speaking, Meng Hao saw the eyes of the black-robed men beginning to glisten as they looked over toward the old man. "Not good," thought Meng Hao, his eyes flashing. Without a moment's hesitation, his body flickered and he shot forward. He moved at incredible speed. The 2 wooden swords screaming necks were like 2 sword dragons that charged directly toward 2 of the black-robed men. Before the 2 men could retreat, the wooden swords stabbed through their foreheads, coming out the other sides of their heads in fountains of red and white. Continuing forward, Meng Hao flashed an incantation and then shoved his palm forward. Multiple images of a hand appeared. They began to emit a roaring sound, then fell apart into small attacks which shot toward the black-robed men. The black-robed men instantly fell back. "Senior Zhou," Meng transmitted to Zhou Dekun, Don't forget the ability of the robe. Get out of here. The dozens of cultivators immediately split into two groups, one of which headed toward Meng Hao, the other toward Zhou Dekun. Everything was happening too quickly. Zhou Dekun was in a panic. However, as soon as Meng Hao reminded him, he stamped his foot onto the ground. His furnace lord's robe began to glow, and suddenly he disappeared. He had just activated the teleportation function of the furnace lord robe, which he could only do 3 times. Seeing Zhou Dekun disappear, a cold snort filled the air. One of the 2 core formation cultivators, the pudgy one, transformed into a beam of light and shot in pursuit of Zhou Dekun. As he disappeared off into the distance, his voice rang out, "We have some East Pill Division cultivators delivered right to our doorstep. Brother Yang, I'll go catch the one that just ran off." Without a word, the other core formation cultivator, the skinny one, resumed his battle with the man from the Golden Frost sect, who was clearly seriously injured at this point. From the look of things, he would be slain at any moment. Down on the ground, the dozens of black-robed men turned their attention from Zhou Dekun to Meng Hao. Meng Hao didn't flee. His eyes glittered with killing intent, and the corners of his mouth turned up into a slight smile. It had been a long time since he had been able to make any sort of attack against anyone. These people in front of him were mere Foundation establishment cultivators. In Meng Hao's eyes, they were already dead. "I haven't killed anyone in 5 years. I guess you guys are going to make me break my record of abstinence." This was the first time in 5 years in which Meng Hao's cultivation base would explode to its full potential. This chapter was sponsored by Xianxia Audiobook. Chapter 261, The Killing Heart is Still There. He would not flee without making the enemy pay a price. That was Meng Hao's personality. Core formation cultivators were engaged in battle not far away, and his decision was still, kill. As the black-robed men approached, Meng Hao's eyes filled with coldness. He lifted his hands and waved them forward. A cold wind sprang up. The wind blasted over the dozens of black-robed men, causing a displacement force to spring up. Immediately, the corpses of the 2 men Meng Hao had just slain with the wooden swords began to expand. In the blink of an eye, they expanded to the point of explosion. Boom! Amidst the roar, chunks of blood and gore showered out in all directions, rapidly turning black. A rotten smell filled the air. As the blood and gore flew out, miserable screams echoed. 7 or 8 black-robed men nearest to the corpses were infected by the black blood. The blood contained poison. As a furnace lord who focused on studying the Tao of poison, he had long since coated the 2 wooden swords with poison that he himself had created. He had done this even when he was still in the Violet Fate sect. The black-robed men looked on in shock for a moment. Before they could react, the ground exploded up as a mass of dark violet vines burst up. There were more than 10 of them, which shot toward the crowd of people. All of this happened in an instant. Blood-curdling screams echoed, and deadly chaos erupted. The killing intent in Meng Hao's eyes boiled, and his body flickered as he shot forward. He sliced his index finger with his thumb. Blood flowed down as the blood finger appeared, unseen in the southern domain for ages. Meng Hao's 6 perfect Tao pillars glowed with a violet aura and began to rotate. His 7th Tao pillar was nearing completion and was now around 80% formed. Power invincible to the Foundation establishment stage poured out from Meng Hao, emanating a massive crushing pressure in all directions. These black-robed men were at the full circle of Foundation establishment. Their Tao pillars immediately began to shake, their faces filling with astonishment. Meng Hao's fearsomeness exceeded anything they could have imagined. How could they ever have predicted that this stranger who had charged into their trap looking like a weak scholar was actually a divinity of death? Meng Hao hadn't fought for 5 years. Now he made only killing moves. His index finger flashed like lightning, slamming down onto one black-robed man's mask and stabbing into his forehead. Perfect Tao pillar power burst out in a terrifying explosive force, destroying the man's Tao pillars in Core C, crushing his will and exterminating his life. His face cold, Meng Hao seized the corpse and stepped toward another black-robed man. He squeezed it, and the corpse exploded. Blackened blood splashed out, drenching the other man before he could react. Terrifying screams filled the air as Meng Hao advanced on the next target. His body flitted around like an evil spirit. One of the black-robed men's face twisted beneath his mask. He bit down on his tongue, spitting out a blood mist to cover his body and delay Meng Hao, while 3 others approached with magical items. Meng Hao gave a cold snort that echoed like thunder, piercing the hearts of the remaining 4 men. The 3 approaching stopped in their tracks, their minds reeling. Meng Hao's right knee flew into the blood mist, shattering it. His knee continued into the black-robed man's chest as his right hand snaked out to seize the man's neck. He turned and spit out lightning mist. A boom filled the air as it enveloped them. Screams rang out, and after a few breaths, Meng Hao emerged. The three approaching men lay dead, eyes wide with astonishment, unable to comprehend how an alchemist possessed such intense killing intent. Of the original 27 black-robed men, 11 remained. Their minds shaken, they backed up nervously. The figure before them seemed less a single cultivator than an army. Meng Hao's hair swirled around his head. Tentacles writhed in the air around him. He emanated the smell of medicinal pills and blood. His cold face and grim eyes caused the black-robed men's hearts to shake. "Who are you?" asked one of the black-robed men, his voice quivering, a question Meng Hao should have posed. Meng Hao didn't respond. His clothes fluttered in the north wind as he lifted his hand. Red powder appeared in his palm. The powder lifted into the wind. The black-robed men's faces twisted as they recalled the hypertoxic poison. The 11 men retreated without hesitation, but Meng Hao made an incantation gesture and pointed his finger. Tiny flame globes appeared and began to turn green as they floated in midair. They ignited, and a massive green flame sea appeared. Its heat impossible to describe, it expanded with the wind and mixed with the floating powder. The raging 3,000-meter-wide flame sea expanded, and the surrounding valley began to crack and melt under the heat. The 11 black-robed men retreated quickly but weren't fast enough to escape the ghostly flame sea. They were consumed. At that moment, a boom sounded in the distance. The azure-masked cultivator lopped off the head of a golden frost sect cultivator, then turned with a grim look to peer at Meng Hao behind the flame sea. Separated by the flame sea, their gazes locked as screams of dying black-robed cultivators drifted up from the flames. Glancing at Meng Hao's clothing, the azure-masked cultivator said, "Such a young East Pill Division Furnace Lord. There's only one person like that. You must be Fang Mu." His voice was hoarse and muffled, yet filled with coldness. "Cultivators with killing intent like this can only be found in one place in the southern domain," replied Meng Hao coolly. "The Black Lands." From his first glimpse of the black-robed cultivators, something had seemed familiar. The same feeling he'd gotten from the Black Civ Sect's blessed land cultivator who'd mentioned the thunderclap leaf's usefulness to Black Land's cultivators. Meng Hao watched the man take a seemingly leisurely step forward, moving with great speed. A wind sprang up as he carved a path through the flame sea. As the azure-masked cultivator shot forward, Meng Hao's furnace lord garment flickered. His body faded as the man arrived in front of him. Flying swords passed harmlessly through Meng Hao's fading image. Fang Mu, prominent in the East Pill Division of the Violet Fate Sect, victor of the Tao Alchemy debate in the Black Civ Sect between the East Pill Division and the World Pill Division. The azure-masked cultivator's voice was cool. He didn't seem to be in a rush to pursue. As he spoke, his right hand slowly lifted and began to make an incantation. "You are the 9th alchemist on our list. How fortunate to meet you. You won't escape." His eyes flickered as he completed the incantation. There, the azure-masked cultivator shot off like lightning. His speed far exceeded Foundation establishment, a different level entirely. His core chi emanated from his body, the hallmark of a core formation cultivator, with colors varying by individual. Even the weakest core chi suffices to crush the great circle of late Foundation establishment. A group of late Foundation establishment cultivators couldn't hope to challenge a core formation cultivator wielding core chi. Core chi elevates core formation magic to its pinnacle. When a cultivator reaches nascent soul, their magic moves halfway toward divine ability. The azure-masked cultivator's core chi was light yellow, the mark of an orange core. Within it, the indistinct shape of a rock seemed to dwell. Core chi had ever-changing forms which can alter according to the will of the cultivator. For example, the rock which appeared in the mind of this cultivator added explosive speed to the core chi. This characteristic allowed core formation magic to reach its greatest power. After only 10 breaths, Meng Hao sensed an incredibly powerful aura approaching from behind. This was not the first time he had faced core formation cultivators. He didn't have much reverence for them. Even back in the state of Zhao, he had led core formation cultivators to their deaths. As the core formation cultivator nearly reached him, the furnace lord garment flickered and transported him 40 kilometers away. Without hesitation, he began to flee. In his palm was the good luck charm, which he hadn't used in 5 years. It was flickering, but he could tell that it would be some time before he could activate it. My seventh Tao pillar is nearly complete. I'm still no match for a core formation cultivator, but I have enough resources. I must reach the great circle of foundation establishment. Resolve filled his eyes. Soon he would employ the accumulated knowledge of 5 years studying the Tao of alchemy. This chapter was sponsored by Samex Golan and Caleb Gleason. Chapter 262, First Battle with Core Formation. A shocking roar sounded in all directions as icy coldness raced toward Meng Hao. 30 breaths had passed since Meng Hao used the Furnace Lord robe to displace himself for the second time. Before he could fly much further away, the azure-masked cultivator was in hot pursuit. In this instance, the man was clearly some distance away. However, the light yellow glow continued to emanate from the top of his head. In it, the image of a sword was faintly visible. It appeared illusory, but even glancing at it from this distance caused Meng Hao's heart to tremble. An intense feeling of danger filled his heart and mind. This guy has cultivated core qi, thought Meng Hao. He was no longer a newcomer to the cultivator world. He had seen and experienced many things, and had learned long ago of the fearsomeness of core formation, especially the shocking core qi. Back in the state of Zhao, none of the core formation cultivators he'd met could utilize core qi except perhaps the old woman, information he deduced from the ancient records of the East Pill Division. 1. The reference to the old woman is from way back in Chapter 81, when Meng Hao led the people into Patriarch Reliance's Immortal's Cave. Core qi has ever-changing forms. However, it has a nucleus which does not change. I wonder what the essence of this guy's core qi is. His heart trembled, but suddenly an idea flickered into his mind. He unhesitatingly used the Furnace Lord ability to warp away. As his body disappeared, the sword image appeared with power to shake heaven and earth, a sealing force locking the area. Meng Hao's illusory body slipped past it. A nimble and crafty alchemist, said the azure-masked cultivator. But you can use that robe only 3 times, not more than 50 kilometers away. Let's see how you escape next time. He closed his eyes as the light yellow core qi spread out. The illusory sword flickered and rotated. After 3 breaths, it hummed and pointed north. The azure-masked cultivator's eyes snapped open, and his body flickered as he shot off toward the north. 40 kilometers away, Meng Hao reappeared. Blood seeped from his mouth, a sword wound on his chest bleeding freely. Had he teleported even slightly slower, the sword would have cleaved him in half. He didn't take the time to wipe the blood from his mouth. His body flashed like lightning as he shot away. A phantom sword. I wonder if this guy's personal core qi is a sword. A grim look appeared on Meng Hao's face. A core formation cultivator who had not cultivated core qi wouldn't cause Meng Hao to be in such a tight spot. However, core qi is the most powerful tool of core formation cultivators. Meng Hao knew that for this azure-masked cultivator to have cultivated core qi in the early core formation stage indicated that he had incredibly high latent talent. After becoming a Furnace Lord, Meng Hao had researched the core formation stage extensively in the ancient records, making him quite familiar with core qi. Generally, core qi is cultivated in the late or occasionally mid-core formation stage. Only a few chosen cultivate it in the early core formation stage. Such cultivators are very rare. The rarest of all are those who seem to innately possess core qi from the moment they step into early core formation. Within the ever-changing forms of core qi is a form that does not change. This is a personal form related to the individual cultivator, which is different for every cultivator. Dark-faced, Meng Hao charged forward. He swallowed a medicinal pill, and warmth filled his body as his speed increased. 30 breaths left. The good luck charm in his hand had been warming up from the moment he began to fight the black-robed men. As of now, there were still 30 breaths left before he could activate it. Then Meng Hao would disappear beyond tracking. But after 18 breaths, the light yellow core qi glow filled the sky. The bitter coldness appeared again. Off in the distance, the thin frame of the azure-masked cultivator could be seen in midair. The surroundings seemed to be shaken into a jumble as he approached relentlessly. Sensing his approach, Meng Hao slapped his bag of holding and smashed a jade pendant between his fingers. "Ah Yang already said you can't escape," the azure-masked cultivator said coolly. "You're a trifling foundation establishment cultivator. Feel proud you've survived this long." The sword image emitted an ear-piercing scream and shot toward Meng Hao, emanating icy coldness. Its speed was incredible, and in the blink of an eye, was directly in front of him. It sped directly toward his forehead and was about to pierce it through. There was absolutely no time for Meng Hao to dodge. The difference between their 2 cultivation bases was too great. Death approached. But a glow shot from Meng Hao's palm. A rippling, water-like glow covered his body and expanded into a greenish-blue shield that the phantom sword slammed into. The azure-masked cultivator's eyes went wide underneath his mask when he saw the shield. His pupils constricted, and an expression of disbelief appeared in his eyes. He was about to recall his core chi phantom sword, but was too late. The core chi phantom sword, seemingly infinitely sharp, slammed into the shield. It weakened and broke into pieces, transforming into dust in a blink. The azure-masked cultivator gave an irritated harumph as the sword dissolved. Blood oozed from his mouth beneath the mask, fury filling his eyes. His core chi had been shattered by a mere foundation establishment cultivator, an injury he would not forget. Nascent soul cultivation blood. Let's see how many times you can pull that off. The killing intent in the azure-masked cultivator's eyes grew more intense. He shot toward Meng Hao, his right hand flickering an incantation gesture. Magical power erupted, transforming into 10 dragons and 10 phoenixes, which spiraled toward Meng Hao. At the same time, the greenish-blue shield began to shrink, returning into Meng Hao's palm and transforming into a jade pendant. This pendant was one of the spoils of his victory in the solitary sword sect. It was a life-saving treasure that contained blood from the cultivation base of Chen Fan's master, Zhou Yanyan, and could defend against an attack from a nascent soul cultivator. 2. Meng Hao won the pendant in Chapter 185. And in case you forgot, Zhou Yanyan is the guy who took Chen Fan from the Reliance sect way back in Chapter 43. It could defend against a nascent soul cultivator, attack once per activation. Defending against core formation had weakened it, and though it could be used again, not now. Blood oozed from the azure-masked cultivator's mouth, his core chi unstable, but he continued advancing, the 10 dragons and 10 phoenixes howling. Intense killing intent appeared in Meng Hao's eyes. He did not flee, but instead lifted his hand and pointed toward the azure-masked cultivator. 8th demon sealing hex. Veins of blood shot through his eyes. As he pointed, heaven and earth shook. Ghost images sprang up and pressed down, sealing the azure-masked cultivator as the 10 dragons and 10 phoenixes trembled. The azure-masked cultivator's expression flickered. The 10 dragons and 10 phoenixes began to tremble as if they were being held down. The world seemed to turn upside down. Everything in the area was sealed. The sealing was such that the azure-masked cultivator seemed incapable of controlling his cultivation base. "What magic is this?" he said, his heart shaking. Veins of blood filled Meng Hao's eyes as he coughed up blood. Using the hex on core formation was an incredible strain. His killing intense soared as he flicked his sleeve, sending red powder out that transformed into a roiling red mist, which shot toward the azure-masked cultivator. At the same time, Meng Hao placed the life-saving jade pendant into his robe. His left hand rose up and he slashed 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, all 5 fingers. Blood flowed down all 5 of his fingers, forming the blood palm. When the blood palm appeared, the red mist around him seethed even more violently, seeming to transform into a mist of blood. The mist began to erode everything in the area. It seemed to be hypertoxic, adding 30% power to Meng Hao's attack. All of this occurred in an instant. As Meng Hao's attacks descended, the azure-masked cultivator's eyes went wide. He suddenly moved again, a core formation cultivator. The 8th hex could seal him only 2 breaths. "Insignificant," howled the azure-masked cultivator. His right hand flickered in an incantation, then pushed out. A roaring filled the air as an illusory, 10-headed dragon appeared and shot to meet Meng Hao's attack. A boom rang out. The red mist collapsed, the blood palm disintegrated. Blood sprayed from Meng Hao's mouth as he was tossed backward. The azure-masked cultivator moved to pursue, but Meng Hao, despite his injuries, slapped his bag of holding and sent more powder into the air, enough to pause the cultivator momentarily. He'd prevented the mist from entering his lungs, but sensed its terrifying power through a tiny infected cut on his right pinky, which now caused intense pain. Even as blood sprayed from Meng Hao's mouth and he toppled backward, his pupils began to glow with a violet light. His skin and chi passageways also began to glow violet, making his entire body glow. This was the violet pupil transformation. 3. Meng Hao learned violet pupil transformation in Chapter 242. Within violet pupil transformation, Meng Hao's body recovered rapidly. He glared at the azure-masked cultivator who was stabilizing. Within 10 breaths, he would release his core chi. Meng Hao didn't hesitate a moment longer. He immediately pressed down on the good luck charm, activating the teleportation ability. A black hole appeared and consumed Meng Hao, catching the azure-masked cultivator by surprise. He shot forward in pursuit, but was too late. This chapter was sponsored by Caleb Gleason. Chapter 263, Ancient Dao Geyser. The azure-masked cultivator's expression was somber, his eyes radiating cold fury. Since entering core formation and cultivating core qi, he'd swept easily across any cultivator lacking it. But today, a foundation establishment cultivator had disintegrated his core qi, injuring him, then suppressed him. Even more infuriating, he'd viewed this ant as weak, yet watched him slaughter all his white-masked men. The provocation caused killing intent to rise, yet the man had fled. His eyes grew sharper with cold fury. His sect would ridicule him if they learned a mere alchemist had escaped. He couldn't accept or understand what had happened. Among all cultivators famed for magic, none compared to this alchemist. In decisiveness, fighting skill, and treachery, this fleeing alchemist seemed like a ruthless Black Lands cultivator. How could there be an alchemist like this? His core qi was fully restored, but he couldn't pick up the slightest track. His opponent had teleported far beyond his senses. After some time, the azure-masked cultivator gave a cold harumph. He was injured by my 10 flood dragon's frigid power. He can run, but not from death, even as a furnace lord. No one survives more than 10 days after being hit. Let's see if he dies in the end. Abandoning pursuit, he disappeared. In the western region of the Great Southern Domain is an area covered with thin mists. Few mountain ranges exist, and many lakes can be seen. Among them is one of the famous 3 danger zones of the Southern Domain, the primordial Dao Lakes. The western region seemed covered with myriad mirror-like lakes. Above one such lake, the glass-like waters rippled. A massive black hole appeared, and Meng Hao staggered out. He coughed up black blood that emitted intense coldness, freezing the lake's surface where it fell. Meng Hao's face was pale. He lifted his head and looked around, then transformed into a prismatic beam that shot off into the distance. Several days later, Meng Hao sat cross-legged in a freshly carved immortal's cave, consuming medicinal pills as he treated his injuries. A month passed. Meng Hao never left the cave, focused entirely on healing. The remote location, sparse population, and protective mists made it peaceful. One day Meng Hao's eyes opened. His face had recovered color, and his body was mostly healed. Azure-masked cultivator, his eyes glowed with cold aura. This was his first serious injury in 5 years. Without violet pupil transformation's healing boost, he couldn't have survived long enough to carve this cave. Furthermore, were he not an alchemist, equipped with a variety of medicinal pills, he wouldn't have been able to last through the month. After all, he had been injured by a core formation expert who could wield core qi. If the core formation expert had faced any foundation establishment cultivator other than Meng Hao, that person would never have been able to flee, and would certainly have been defeated. Meng Hao took a deep breath. His expression grim, he produced a pill furnace and began to concoct. Intense coldness remained in his body. Meng Hao began to concoct a medicinal pill, specifically designed for his current circumstances. Months passed. 3 days after consuming his specially designed pill, Meng Hao opened his eyes and spat out the last of the icy coldness, which scattered and froze throughout the cave before it returned to normal. Had the azure-masked cultivator witnessed this, he wouldn't believe his eyes. He had no doubt no foundation establishment cultivator could survive the 10 flood dragons' frigid power. Yet Meng Hao had clearly recovered. He took a deep breath, killing intent growing in his eyes. Determination filled his gaze as he smacked his bag of holding to produce the pill furnace again. He held it in his hand, lost in thought. I need pills to surge ahead. A medicinal pill that will produce a Dao pillar, exceed foundation establishment strength, and cause my cultivation base to soar. Countless formulas appeared in his mind until he settled on the stage charging pill. This pill can be used with the 3 mortalities pill in order to break through from the foundation establishment stage into the core formation stage. His eyes filled with decisiveness as he produced medicinal plants and began to concoct. Several days passed with multiple failures, even using the alchemy Dao transmutation incantation. Only on the 17th day did he succeed. 1. Meng Hao learned the alchemy Dao transmutation incantation in chapter 242. A medicinal aroma filled the cave, one he'd prepared to contain. Holding the pill, his eyes glittered. He took out the copper mirror and spirit stones to duplicate it. One after another, pills appeared. 10 full bottles were soon arranged before him. He spat out lightning mist, sent wooden swords circling, and activated the Furnace Lord Medallion. After all preparations, he took a deep breath and swallowed a stage-charging pill. His seventh Tao pillar was 80% complete. The pill transformed into spiritual power that caused his body to tremble. The pillar emanated a purple glow and solidified further. Press on to the finish, he thought, his eyes shining with determination. He then closed his eyes and began to meditate. A month later, Meng Hao's body began to tremble and wither. He calmly produced and consumed medicinal pills one after another. 7 days later, a roaring filled his body. A purple glow filled the immortal's cave as the seventh Tao pillar fully appeared. Meng Hao's cultivation base shot upward. His spiritual sense and battle prowess strengthened. He became like an unsheathed sword, incomparably dangerous. Now, he was no longer in the mid-foundation establishment stage, but rather the late foundation establishment stage. Even someone with a flawless foundation would not be able to give rise to the slightest bit of struggle against the suppressive pressure he could emit. As of now, he was without a doubt the #1 person in the entire foundation establishment stage. But Meng Hao wasn't content. He wanted to fight the azure-masked cultivator, and his current cultivation base wasn't sufficient. A bright glow filled his eyes. He retrieved spirit stones, profits from East Pill Division sales, gifts from the Black Civ sect, and gains from traveling with Joe Deccan, and began duplicating pills. It was considerable, yet never seemed enough. However, if he truly wanted to go the distance today, then he would have to ignore the pain and use them to duplicate medicinal pills. The cultivation he was about to practice was something that no one in the southern domain had ever seen before. Even Dao children would not be able to squander medicinal pills in the way that Meng Hao was right now. Months passed. Lost in his immortal's cave, Meng Hao cultivated as his 8th Tao pillar slowly appeared. After half a year, it was 80% complete. Meanwhile, outside in the southern domain, a violent windstorm of a commotion had arisen. This storm came from the Black Lands. Black Lands cultivators were making incursions into the southern domain. More than 70 alchemists mysteriously disappeared. These events caused huge commotion. Missing alchemists were mostly from the East and World Pill divisions, though others were involved. The Violet Fate and Golden Frost sects' fury rose to the heavens. These two sects were the first to take action. Mysterious patriarchs from both sects immediately traveled to the Black Lands. According to the rumors, Grandmasters Pill Demon and Eternal Mountain both secretly made the trip themselves. The Black Lands had existed for years as a brutal place, but the southern domain could do little. The details weren't public. The Golden Frost sect recovered none of their alchemists, while the Violet Fate sect recovered all but one Furnace Lord, Joe Deccan. After, neither sect mentioned the Black Lands again. The Black Lands seemed to quiet. Everything appeared normal in the southern domain. No more alchemists went missing, and no one knew what happened in the Black Lands. After half a year in which the Black Lands, aggressiveness had been reined in, a Tao geyser appeared not far away from the primordial Tao lakes, in the western part of the southern domain. Within the fountain, an illusory image showed an ancient foundation establishment cultivator breaking through to core formation. The geyser's appearance caused huge stir among southern domain sects and clans. Veterans inspected it, then left. Afterward, chosen disciples and Tao children were dispatched to observe. A message was sent out by a late nascent soul stage patriarch from the solitary sword sect. This geyser contains enlightenment. Gain this enlightenment, and you might enter core formation. It is not suitable for us, but rather for you foundation establishment cultivators. These words caused huge commotion. Foundation establishment chosen from all areas flocked west. A month later, Black Civ sect Tao child Joe Jai broke through and entered core formation with a green core, astonishing everyone. This chapter was sponsored by Joshua Isaacs. Chapter 264, A Shout Like a Clap of Thunder. After Joe Jai reached core formation via the ancient Tao geyser, a long-lasting storm swept foundation establishment cultivators. All foundation establishment disciples rushed to the western region. Now, the western region, which previously contained hardly the trace of a person, quickly became a convergence of chosen. Of course, friction immediately broke out. For months, there were countless battles. Whoever came out on the top of such battles would instantly become famous. Such spontaneous conventions were rare, as was assembling so many chosen in one place. Now it happened thanks to the ancient Tao geyser. The geyser erupted on a monthly basis. Furthermore, there was limited space in which to properly observe it. As such, it was common for magical battle to erupt. In the second month, Black Civ sect conclave disciple Su Qing defeated Li clan Dao child Li Deity, a victory that rocked the western region. Unknown before, her name spread far afterward. In the fourth month, Wang clan Dao child Wang Lihai, the one rumored to have died years ago, and Han Shandao too. Han Shandao's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Han Shandao. Han is a common surname. Shan means mountain. Dao means way or path. Same characters as the Dao. One of the 7 sons gained geyser enlightenment. Though they didn't break through, their cultivation bases grew significantly with enlightenment regarding a magical technique. In the 5th month, Song clan Dao child Song Yunchu III. Song Yunchu was introduced when Meng Hao went to the Song clan, battled Chen Fan, another 7 sons member. Though evenly matched, Chen Fan's reputation grew from the battle. That month, Blood Demon clan Dao child Li Shiki IV. Meng Hao fought Li Shiki right after he escaped from the Black Civ sect with ultimate vexation. He thought she was a guy at first, fought solitary sword sect heroine Shanling IV. Shanling was introduced in chapter 180. Actually, the chapter was named after her. The battle filled the area with explosions and ended not in victory or defeat, but in both gaining geyser enlightenment. In the 6th month, Golden Frost sect Dao child fought Blood Demon sect chosen Wang Yaoke. The Dao child's arm was severed in a bloody battle, sending waves of astonishment throughout the southern domain. That month, Wang Tengfei, Wang clan chosen and Wang Lihai's younger brother, gained enlightenment and broke through to the great circle of foundation establishment, causing quite a stir. By observing the tableau within the erupting geyser and gaining the power of the enlightenment, one could gain something from nothing and cause the cultivation base to grow without the use of any medicinal pills. It was an opportunity for incredible luck for anyone in the foundation establishment stage in the southern domain. The geyser enabled sudden breakthroughs from foundation establishment to core formation. Only a breakthrough from core formation to nascent soul would be more incredible, with struggles one could imagine. The western region was thrown into turmoil. Only the Violet Fate sect didn't dispatch disciples to the geyser, leading to speculation it was tied to the Black Lands incident. The western region of the southern domain quickly became the focus of all attention. Not very far off from the location of the Dao geyser, Meng Hao sat cross-legged in meditation. His body was withered as a corpse, yet boundless life force existed within. His heartbeat rang out, growing louder. His 8th Dao pillar was now more than 90% complete. The critical juncture had arrived, and he had consumed roughly 70 to 80% of his medicinal pills. At the moment, over 100 empty pill bottles were strewn about the immortal's cave. Time slowly passed. Soon, half a month had gone by. Outside, black clouds filled the sky and thin rain fell, making the world hazy. Suddenly, 2 prismatic beams of light shot through the area. 2 young cultivators locked in magical combat, one from solitary sword sect, one from blood demon sect. Well-known chosen from their sects, they fought bitterly with constant booming from their techniques. Their shocking techniques caused booms as they attacked. Unbeknown to them, they were nearing Meng Hao's isolated mountain. Ripples from their techniques reached toward it. A massive boom sounded. Within the immortal's cave, Meng Hao's withered body suddenly opened its eyes, flashing like lightning. His gaze blasted out with brilliant light, shocking enough to shake the mountain. Even the falling rain vibrated. The 2 cultivators, focused on each other, suddenly felt their hair stand on end. Danger rose and their expressions changed. Their cultivation bases were suppressed, bodies twitched, scalps grew numb. Death seemed to stare down upon them. Meng Hao's shriveled lips opened. His sound began weak, then rose to a frenzied roar filling the world outside the cave. It slammed into the 2 cultivators, ears louder than thunder, engulfing them as if the only sound. Screw off. Screw off. Loff. Loff. The boom echoed through a 5-kilometer region, making it a forbidden zone. The 2 cultivators' minds reeled as they coughed up blood. Late foundation establishment, they seemed weak beneath that voice. Pale-faced, numb-scalped, panic-stricken, they retreated at top speed. Only 50 kilometers away did they look back. Rain fell around them. Moments before, in a life-and-death battle, neither was now in the mood to fight. They glanced at each other, both feeling they'd barely avoided disaster. Who was that? All the heroes of the southern domain have come to the western region, a multitude of Dao children and chosen. I'm not sure who this guy is, but the feeling he gives is even more terrifying than the feeling I get from elder sister Shan Ling or elder brother Han Shandao of my solitary sword sect. Same here. Even facing up against elder sister Li wouldn't be as frightening. I felt like I was immortal. Seeing how they were both so shaken, they silently turned and sped off, each in a different direction. 3 days later, Meng Hao sat in the immortal's cave. Violet light rose from his body without spreading beyond the sealed cave, turning the entire interior violet. The glow lasted hours, then slowly faded. Meng Hao sat unmoved for nearly half a year. He was completely recovered, eyes closed but with explosive power growing within. Though still, he seemed to move in ways that would shake the heavens and earth. The deity is the Tao child Meng Hao fought in the Blood Immortal Legacy Tournament. Han Shandao's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Han Shandao. Han is a common surname. Shan means mountain. Dao means way or path. Same characters as the Tao. Song Yunchu was introduced when Meng Hao went to the Song clan. Meng Hao fought Li Shiki right after he escaped from the Black Civ sect with ultimate vexation. He thought she was a guy at first. Wang Yaokai was one of the group originally taken by Su Qing to the Reliance sect. Chapter 265, Out of Seclusion. Slowly, the ferocious aura faded, and Meng Hao opened his eyes. His pupils looked normal, but deep within was shocking profundity like deep pools or an endless starry sky. Meng Hao took a long, deep breath. Within his body, his 8 Tao pillars glowed with a violet aura. They rotated, emitting spiritual power throughout his body which far, far outmatched his previous power. It's still not enough, but it's the best I can do. 8 Tao pillars, not quite enough to pass the critical juncture for the 9th. It wasn't a lack of pills. He had a strange feeling the 9th Tao pillar had nothing to do with pills. He sensed a bottleneck before a turning point when he could rely on 8 Tao pillars to create the 9th without pills, completing the great circle of foundation establishment. He took a deep breath and sat there thoughtfully for a long moment. Finally, he lifted his head and looked outside of the immortal's cave. It was still raining. The murmur of the rainfall filled the land. Everything looked dim and hazy. His seclusion had lasted long, and he knew nothing of events during that time. He didn't know if Zhou Dekan had survived. Meng Hao chose not to go out yet. His eyes shining, he produced a spring and autumn tree from his bag. Once he went out, he wanted to be fully prepared to settle his defeat with the azure-masked cultivator with death. Meng Hao took a deep breath and lifted the spring and autumn tree. A blinding violet glow appeared in his palm as he employed his 8 Tao pillars' full power to catalyze it. The violet light grew more and more intense, and the spring and autumn tree sucked it in. Soon, a second sprout appeared on its surface. At the same time, Meng Hao's left hand performed the incantation to brand the spring and autumn tree with the time-locking magic. Including the test in the Black Civ sect, 20 years of time are now locked within this tree. He pulled out a jade box with the primordial heavenly replenishing pill and examined it alongside the tree. Time is like a poison which can be used to refine treasures. It melts away life force. Within Meng Hao's mind appeared the images of what had happened to Chen Jiaxi. After some time passed, he took a deep breath, and then once again picked up the spring and autumn tree and began to catalyze the time within. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. The spring and autumn tree was now half gray with nearly 50 years of time locked within. The further he went, the more cultivation base he needed and the slower it progressed. He was completing the final 10 years of a 60-year cycle. At dusk, with rain still falling, Meng Hao focused intently. Suddenly his expression flickered. The tree had begun to wither. It seemed as if the tree couldn't handle the 50 years of time. Regardless of what mystical properties the spring and autumn tree had, at this moment it was decaying. Soon, it turned into gray ash, which collapsed through Meng Hao's fingers. An unsightly expression appeared. His hand appeared to have aged from the failure's recoil. Ignoring his hand, Meng Hao began to think. No wonder such treasures are rare. Forging time treasures is extremely complex. One failure negates all previous successes. A slight mistake at the end ruins everything, and every failure costs life force. However, if there's anyone who can actually forge this treasure, then that person is me. His eyes began to glow brightly, and muttering to himself, he slapped his right hand down onto his bag of holding to retrieve another spring and autumn tree. Once again, he began to catalyze it. By that night, the new tree contained 10 years of time. 10 days later, he'd reached 50 years again. He took a deep breath, consumed pills to restore energy, then opened his eyes. Before catalyzing the final 10 years, he produced the copper mirror and duplicated medicinal pills and the spring and autumn tree with its 50 years. It seemed that a full 60-year cycle of time was a watershed mark. Before reaching it, the duplication cost wouldn't be very high. However, after reaching the 60-year cycle, Meng Hao had the strong feeling that the duplication cost would increase tremendously. A few moments later, a bang sounded out. An irritated look appeared on Meng Hao's face as his entire right arm aged, and the spring and autumn tree once again crumbled into dust. He didn't have many spirit stones left, but he pushed down the sense of pain and used almost the entire remaining amount to produce another copy, which he then began to catalyze. The catalyzation lasted 2 days before the tree turned gray. After sealing it with time-sealing magic, it emitted an archaic sense of time. He had finally succeeded with a full 60-year cycle. Meng Hao panted as he looked at the tree. Its feel of time was similar to the primordial heavenly replenishing pill, though weaker. Sadly, I lack spirit stones. A 60-year time treasure is powerful enough for now. He began to whittle it with his left hand. Moments later, he held a simple wooden sword, crude in appearance but a magical treasure he'd created himself. He looked at the wooden time sword for a moment, then put it into his bag of holding. Next, he produced jade bottles of ancestral blood from 3 generations, collected when concocting soul-refining pills for the Black Sieve sect. From this blood, I can create 5 rudimentary blood clones. Within his mind, he could see the description of blood clones which was contained in the blood immortal legacy. Blood clones are like shadows, meld into them and they become doppelgangers, life and death tied to my thoughts. A clone contains 20 to 30% of my power. Upgraded to blood spirit, it's 100%. With 9 generations of blood, a blood divinity defies the heavens. The blood immortal legacy was truly sinister. After studying the Tao of alchemy and poison, his understanding deepened. Like poison, magic has thousands of types. The great Tao is limitless, filled with paths according to will and decision. He lifted his right hand and began creating blood clones. This technique used one's own blood as the spirit, and the 3 generations of ancestral blood to bolster it. Furthermore, a sacrificial object was also necessary. According to the blood immortal legacy, this sacrificial object was of utmost importance. Of course, there are myriad objects in heaven and earth. Plants and trees, rocks and earth, anything could be used. In fact, the ancient blood immortal even used the skin of his enemies as the sacrificial object. As long as the sacrificial object survived, the clone couldn't be destroyed. Greater fusion meant greater power. After thinking for a moment, Meng Hao decided that the sacrificial item he would use would be the meat jelly's shed skin. The meat jelly had left residual skin, and Meng Hao retrieved 5 fingernail-sized pieces to refine the blood clones. 3 months passed. The Tao geyser in the western region of the southern domain eventually increased its rate of eruption from once per month to every 3 days. Soon, the interval grew shorter, every 2 days and then every day. Eventually, it was erupting multiple times per day, with no end in sight. According to the ancient records of the sects of the southern domain, continuous eruptions would go on for 7 days, and then the geyser would disappear. Time was running out. The chosen of the great sects and clans spent all their time and focus on trying to gain enlightenment, vying for a chance to receive good fortune at the critical moment. Blood Demon Sect Tao Child Li Shiki gained enlightenment and broke through to core formation. Spiritual energy poured from the geyser, absorbable only by her. After her was Tao Child of the Li clan, Li Dai, the very same one who had been defeated but not killed by Su Qing. His name immediately spread throughout the southern domain as the 3rd cultivator to break through to core formation. Again, the spiritual energy which poured out of the Tao geyser could only be absorbed by him, the one who had gained enlightenment. The southern domain was in full commotion. During this time, Meng Hao finally left seclusion after nearly a year. His hair was long, his right hand withered, and he wore an azure robe instead of violet Fate Sect Furnace Lord robes. On a rainy morning, he emerged and transformed into a prismatic beam that shot into the distance. His expression was placid, but his eyes seemed to contain the profundity of the stars. His cultivation base was Foundation Establishment, but his battle prowess was no longer comparable to other Foundation Establishment cultivators. He wanted to find out how much more powerful he'd become. So he would go to battle. Through battle, he would gain enlightenment of heaven and earth, gain enlightenment regarding his 9th Tao pillar, and shock the world. This chapter was sponsored by Janice Benyat, Hong Lai, and Safeka. Chapter 266, The Faceless Azure Hero. 7 days later, massive storm winds buffeted the southern domain. All southern domain cultivators in the western region were shaken. It was all because of one name. The Faceless Azure Hero. According to the rumors, he wore a long, azure-colored robe, and his face was nothing but a blur. According to the rumors, he was only in the late Foundation establishment stage, but his battle prowess was incredible, something rarely seen. According to the rumors, whenever he attacked, he would only say one thing: "Fight." The rumors had begun to spread immediately after his first battle, 7 days before. He had fought a chosen of the Golden Frost sect, who was of the great circle of late Foundation establishment. They had met each other flying in mid-air, and for no apparent reason, the words "fight" had been uttered, whereupon a boom filled the sky. The Golden Frost sect chosen was defeated instantly, as if dry weeds waiting to be crushed. Many people saw the fight. It was incredibly shocking, but before they could even spread the news, they witnessed the faceless Azure hero's second battle. His opponent was a chosen of the Blood Demon sect. Again, the chosen was defeated in an instant. Their lives were spared, but such decisive defeats were like massive floodwaters that smashed self-confidence. In the following days, the Li clan, Black Civ sect, Song clan, Solitary Sword sect, Wang clan, all great sects and clans saw similar fates. Anyone meeting the azure-robed man couldn't make 2 attacks and were instantly defeated. The western region of the southern domain was in an uproar as everyone began to speculate regarding the identity of this faceless, azure-robed man. Opinions were widely varied. On the 8th day, roughly 1,500 kilometers away from the Dao Geyser, where the Solitary Sword sect disciples were gathered together, an azure-robed form flitted about in midair. Up ahead was a middle-aged man with a flushed face. His eyes shone brightly as he stared at the azure-robed man in front of him. "Just who exactly are you?" The azure-robed man was naturally none other than Meng Hao. For several days, he'd fought constantly to gain battle enlightenment regarding his 9th Dao pillar. He'd heard of the geyser and those who'd reached core formation. Instead of immediately going to the geyser, he challenged southern domain heroes. After days of victories, he'd set his sights on the Dao children of various sects and clans. The middle-aged man in front of him was none other than the first of the 7 sons of the Solitary Sword sect, Xianxia, of the great circle of Foundation establishment, halfway to core formation. "Fight or not?" asked Meng Hao, his voice cool. Xianxia's eyes shone brightly. He laughed heartily and sent his massive greatsword screaming out, its aura shining to the heavens. A light smile touched Meng Hao's lips as he advanced a step. A massive boom filled the air. Blood sprayed from Xianxia's mouth as he tumbled backward, astonishment filling his face. His greatsword crumbled, and even the hidden flying dagger inside shook with cracks. One moment, one move, utter defeat. A slash stretched from his right shoulder to left armpit, bone visible and blood gurgling. Pale-faced, one of the other Solitary Sword sect disciples helped him to his feet. He took a deep breath and stood there on wobbly legs. "Your Excellency has gained enlightenment regarding the ancient battle incantation contained in the Dao Geyser. I concede defeat." Meng Hao didn't respond. He turned and left. Many people during these 8 days had brought up the Dao Geyser and ancient battle incantation. After he left, the blurriness on his face changed, revealing Fang Mu. Hour later, he looked out over a massive lake. It was a lake, but it would be more proper to call it a Dao Geyser. Over 10,000 cultivators surrounded the lake, sitting cross-legged in meditation. Meng Hao's arrival attracted no attention. He looked around at the crowds, and then selected a spot with fewer people, where he sat down cross-legged and began to silently observe the Dao Geyser. Time passed. On the 2nd day, Meng Hao noticed that more and more cultivators were arriving from all directions. By midday, there were now several tens of thousands of people present. By evening, the area was packed. Nearly 100,000 cultivators filled it. Suddenly, water shot up and then glowing lights appeared above the Dao Geyser. The lights interlocked to form a screen in the sky. Within the screen was the indistinct image of a person, sitting cross-legged in meditation, both hands flashing an incantation. It was a Dao projection. It's appeared. What exactly is the enlightenment contained in the Dao Geyser? What the hell? I've been here for nearly a year, but my cultivation base hasn't made the slightest bit of progress. The voices of the surrounding cultivators filled the air. Meng Hao examined the screen. The blurry image glowed clearer, revealing a man whose illusory image emanated killing intent. The killing intent was faint, but Meng Hao was sure it was there, and that he was not the only person to notice it. He calmed his heart and forced tranquility upon himself, staring at the figure until zoning out everything else. An entire night passed with no progress. An eager voice came from off to the side. "Hey, fellow Taoist, check this out." A middle-aged man, gaunt but bright-eyed, radiated shrewdness. Meng Hao had noticed him earlier, peddling books through the crowds. Few showed interest and most found him annoying. He was discreet and sensed when he wasn't wanted. Now he stood next to Meng Hao with eager expression, bowing and hurriedly speaking. "Fellow Taoist, are you worried because you haven't gained the enlightenment of the Tao Geyser?" His voice was filled with infectious enthusiasm. "Have you encountered a mountain of treasure but aren't really sure what to do with it?" Meng Hao stared, taken aback. "Don't worry a bit," continued the man, his eyes shining brightly. "You are about to gaze upon the exalted Lord's limitless ancient Tao Geyser enlightenment primer." He slapped his bag of holding, and immediately a faded pamphlet appeared in his hand. "I've recorded enlightenment from countless fellow Taoists, even celestial goddess Su Qing, Li Shiki, and Wang Lihai. Over 100 chosen's knowledge is contained within. It was copious blood, sweat, and tears." He spoke quickly, gesturing, while Meng Hao stared in shock. "Fellow Taoist, I know what you're thinking. The value of a book such as the Exalted Lord's Limitless Ancient Enlightenment Primer is impossible to determine. It's priceless, right?" He slapped his thigh, as if forcing himself to make a decision. "Fellow Taoist, you can rest assured. The cost to acquire this Exalted Lord's Limitless Enlightenment Primer is not 100,000 spirit stones. It is not 10,000 spirit stones. Nor is it 1,000 spirit stones. This book, which contains the enlightenment of over 100 chosen, as well as several Tao children, which was compiled at the cost of countless blood, sweat, and tears, this Exalted Lord's Limitless Enlightenment Primer can be yours for only 99 spirit stones." Meng Hao cleared his throat. "Fellow Taoists, don't lose out on this opportunity. You have a chance now that will never return again. Listen, I'll tell you a secret." He looked around, then lowered his voice. "Have you heard of the faceless azure hero, the famous, ruthless wanderer who defeated countless chosen in a blink? A few days ago, he fought Han Shandao of the solitary sword sect, and Han Shandao was defeated decisively. Fellow Taoist, listen. Just half a month ago, the faceless azure hero purchased one of my Exalted Lord's Limitless Enlightenment primers." Meng Hao frowned as he took another look at the middle-aged man. Okay, how about 10 spirit stones? I'll sell you a copy for 10 spirit stones. You're my first customer of the day, which makes us friends. I'm Su Liushan, disciple of the Blood Demon sect." Meng Hao hesitated for a moment and then said, "I only have 3 spirit stones." He promptly pulled out his final 3 spirit stones from his robe. "Deal," replied the middle-aged man, without a moment's hesitation. He immediately placed the Exalted Lord's Limitless Enlightenment Primer into Meng Hao's hand, apparently fearing that Meng Hao might change his mind. Meng Hao looked at the pamphlet with a wry smile. A sudden breeze passed by, flipping open the pamphlet. Meng Hao's eyes suddenly narrowed, and he handed the 3 spirit stones to Su Liushan. Su Liushan quickly left, sighing about difficult business. He'd been at the geyser for some time, drawing images each time the screen appeared, then selling them. Meng Hao ignored Su Liushan and leafed through the pamphlet. The drawings seemed identical, but a strange light gleamed in his eyes. He looked at the image hovering above the geyser. "The images appear identical, but each is different." He studied the screen until it began to fade. A tremor ran through him. He'd seen a strand of qi within the figure, constantly in motion, causing subtle differences in each drawing. Chapter 267, Black Lands Cultivators. The screen faded. Cultivators departed. Meng Hao remained cross-legged, staring into blank air, thinking. 2 days after the appearance of the Tao projection in the evening, Meng Hao closed his eyes. When it was deep in the night, his body flickered, and he disappeared. The Wang clan Tao child and chosen, in fact anyone in whose veins ran the blood of the Wang clan, were all congregated on a mountain not too far from the Tao Geyser. This particular night was doomed to be anything but tranquil. The moon hung high in the sky when Meng Hao appeared just outside the mountain. He glanced up at the Wang clan banner fluttering in the wind at the top of the mountain, then shot up toward it. "Who are you? You dare to charge into Wang clan territory? This place is marked with the Wang clan banner. Your Excellency, please halt." Voices rose up as 8 figures flew out, shooting toward Meng Hao. In front of them appeared whistling sword Qi, which also shot directly at Meng Hao. Calm-faced, he flicked his right sleeve. Power exploded from his 8 Tao pillars, transforming into crushing pressure that spread as gale-force wind. A boom filled the air, and the 8 sword auras collapsed into pieces. The 8 cultivators' faces filled with shock as they tumbled backward, mouths spewing blood. They couldn't pause him. He passed through their midst toward the mountain top. 10 beams flew out, followed by nearly 100 people heading straight for him. You dare to charge into Wang clan territory. It doesn't matter what sect you're from, we're gonna bury you here today. What's the point of being so long-winded? Kill this guy. As the group of people approached, magical lights began to shine up. Even people far away would be able to see the shocking glow which filled the night sky. Calm-faced, he sliced his finger and catalyzed blood with his Tao pillar power. Everything turned red and became a massive blood dragon that roared forward into the charging cultivators. Shock filled their faces as blood sprayed, and they spun backward out of control. A path now led to the top of the mountain, a path carved out by the blood dragon. Amidst thunderous roars, Meng Hao advanced, and within the space of about 10 breaths, stood at the peak of the mountain. Behind him, the chosen of the Wang clan coughed up blood. During his entire way up the mountain, no one had been able to do anything to block Meng Hao's way. The faceless azure hero, people cried amidst their gasps. The Wang clansmen surrounded the mountain peak, all of them staring at Meng Hao. In front of Meng Hao was a cultivator wearing a black robe and a grim expression. He appeared to be about 30 years of age, and his eyes shone with a profound gleam as he looked at Meng Hao. This was none other than Wang Lihai, Tao child of the Wang clan. His cultivation base was halfway to core formation. His presence made it seem as if there were another mountain peak on his mountain. "Sir, I have come here today to fight the Wang clan Tao child," said Meng Hao. His cool voice rang out in a tone that could sever nails and slice iron. "Let's fight." Wang Lihai's eyes glittered as he stepped forward. Behind him, an image containing a sea of stars and yellow springs appeared. 3-finger attacks shot toward Meng Hao. The first finger seemed capable of transforming life into death. The second embodied killing intent that seemed to stem from the yellow springs. The third contained the silence of extermination, making the world seem empty. These 3-finger attacks were a magical technique of the Wang clan, the vermilion bird 3 fingers. Wang Lihai was well aware that this faceless azure hero was unfathomable. Therefore, he attacked him without the slightest bit of contempt and led with his most powerful magical technique. Meng Hao's eyes glowed brightly. He strode forward, also lifting up his right hand, immediately attacking with one of the 3 blood immortal techniques, the blood finger. A boom rattled, and a massive wind sprang up as Meng Hao's body became a beam that shot into the air. All eyes fixed on Wang Lihai. His expression unchanged, he watched Meng Hao disappear. He coughed up blood and staggered backward, his index finger quivering and swollen. "Defeated," he murmured. Astonishment covered the other Wang clansmen's faces. Wang Li wasn't the only one to be defeated that night. Song Yunchu, Tao child of the Song clan, as well as the Tao child of the Golden Frost sect were also vanquished. From the Song clan airship, Song Yunchu leaned against the wall, blood dripping, staring at Meng Hao's shadow. Stubborn determination appeared on his face. Outside the Golden Frost sect valley, a shocking roar filled the dawn air, and the Tao child was defeated. He immediately went into seclusion. Few witnessed the battle. The next day, the name of the faceless azure hero swept across the western region of the southern domain. There was not a single person who hadn't heard that he had defeated not only chosen from the various sects, but solitary sword sect Tao child Han Shandao, Wang clan Tao child Wang Lihai, Song clan Tao child Song Yunchu, and the Tao child of the Golden Frost sect. The faceless azure hero rose to prominence in the western region. Some already considered him on par with those who'd broken through to core formation. Many believed the mysterious man would challenge more Tao children. Shockingly, after the 3 battles, he went into hiding. The azure-robed man now sat cross-legged near the geyser, staring at the screen, lost in thought. After sensing the chi and the Tao projection, he had gone to fight the 3 battles in the night. However, fighting them did nothing. He had the feeling that if he was able to gain enlightenment regarding the chi and the figure, then he would be able to create his 9th Tao pillar. Meng Hao didn't know what the chi was, but after the Tao projection disappeared this time, he was able to sense that his own body also had a similar strand of chi within it. After observing the screen and the figure, he was able to circulate the chi strand. When evening fell, he once again stood up. For 2 days, Meng Hao was unable to find an appropriate opponent. Li Daiyi, Zhou Jai and Li Shiki had apparently all left the western region of the southern domain. Meng Hao couldn't find them. Eventually, he returned to the Tao geyser to once again observe the screen. Eventually, he closed his eyes and began to mentally review his various victories over the chosen and Tao children. The images of his opponents grew clearer in his mind, and he realized they all had a similar chi strand, some thick, some thin, but present in all. Early the second day, Meng Hao opened his eyes and looked at the tens of thousands surrounding the geyser. All had this mysterious chi within them. It seemed to appear in anyone who observed the geyser. Meng Hao sat there thoughtfully for some time, his brow furrowed. Over the following half-month, his reputation grew. Everyone spoke of him with fear. He seemed crazed, instantly attacking any late Foundation establishment cultivator regardless of affiliation. He never killed anyone. No one could make 2 attacks. Everyone suffered complete defeat. All solitary sword sect chosen in the region were defeated, as were Golden Frost sect chosen. Fear filled anyone's face seeing the azure robe. Wang clan, Li clan, Song clan, all suffered defeat. It was as if an azure-colored storm had descended upon the entirety of the western region of the southern domain. Half a month later, the geyser was reaching its final moments. The screen had appeared and wasn't disappearing, meaning it would dry up in 7 days. More and more cultivators sat cross-legged near the Dao geyser, staring at the screen. It was at this exact same time that the challenges issued by the azure-robed man ceased. Meng Hao sat cross-legged near the geyser, looking at the figure. His eyes were bright. Each victory had caused the chi strand to grow, and he could now match its rotation frequency. The figure's chi strand was rotating faster, building momentum on the verge of exploding. A strand of battle chi cultivated through constant victories. It breaks bottlenecks and increases cultivation base. He took a deep breath and began rotating the chi strand. He was just a hair from creating his 9th Dao pillar but couldn't make the final charge. Now on the 5th day of the geyser's final 7 days, several beams of prismatic light appeared. The beams were filled with black-robed figures, all of whom wore masks. Shockingly, 3 of them wore azure-colored masks, 7 or 8 wore white masks. There were 2, a man and a woman, who took the lead, and they wore gold-colored masks. The dozen or so people whistled toward the geyser, catching the attention of tens of thousands. Some immediately recognized them, Black Land's cultivators. Meng Hao also looked up. His gaze fell upon one of the azure-masked cultivators, a skinny man who stood off to the side. Meng Hao's eyes began to glow. This chapter was sponsored by Anonymous. Chapter 268, The Height of the Heavens and the Depth of the Earth. This azure-masked cultivator was the core formation expert who tried to kill him. I've run out of people to fight here, Meng Hao thought. This is my next opponent. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, ensuring he was at peak ability. Now that he had decided to fight, he was extremely calm. He must attack, win or lose. This was the final step in his enlightenment. As he closed his eyes, Black Land's people arrived, attracting most attention. Though Zhou Jai and others who'd reached core formation were absent, Wang Lihai, Han Shandao, and all other Dao children were present. Among the tens of thousands of cultivators near the Dao geyser, there were many who recognized the 2 in the gold masks. Those 2 in the gold-colored masks. They're Dao children who have risen to prominence in the last year in the Black Lands. Black Land's Dao children Luo Chang and Sohe. The discussion spread, and soon all eyes came to rest on the 2 Black Land's Dao children. In the past year, stories about them had spread into the southern domain, making them quite well known. They were halfway to core formation, and according to rumor, might increase their cultivation bases at any time. The 3 in the azure masks behind them must be the Black Land's 3 azures. All 3 have cultivation bases at the core formation stage. Even more shocking is their core chi. They say that a lot of alchemists were captured by them. Core formation cultivators who have core chi are not to be trifled with. Wang Lihai frowned as he looked at the group of people from the Black Lands. Not far off, Han Shandao of the solitary sword sect didn't look very pleased. This was especially so as he looked at the Black Land's Dao children. Song Yunchu stood wordlessly in the crowd, his face grim. The 2 gold-masked Dao children from the Black Lands peered down at the crowds. One of them spoke. His voice was soft at first, but then rapidly escalated into a roar like thunder. I, Luo Chang from the Black Lands, wish to challenge the southern domain's heroic Dao children to a duel. Immediately, the black-robed, white-masked cultivators moved backward. The 3 azure-masked cultivators' faces didn't change in the slightest. They hovered cross-legged in midair, paying no attention to what was happening. The other gold-masked Black Land's Dao child, Sohe, also spoke, in a voice much softer than Luo Chang's, but which became icy cold as it entered the ears of the surrounding cultivators. I, Su Fei from the Black Lands, also wish to challenge the Southern Domain's heroic Dao children to a duel. Not a single of the tens of thousands of cultivators surrounding the Dao geyser said a word. They simply looked up at Luo Chang and Su Fei, a variety of different thoughts running through their heads. Luo Chang gave a cold harumph. Don't tell me that among the throngs of Southern Domain cultivators, not one dares to fight with us. His words rang out, filled with an intangible domineering aura that made his challenge seem even more intense. Suddenly, a cold snort filled the air. A beam of light shot up. This was not someone from one of the 5 sects or 3 clans. It was a cultivator from some other sect, with a cultivation base of the Great Circle of Foundation establishment. He shot directly toward Luo Chang. Beneath his mask, the Black Land's Dao Child smiled. His body flickered as he advanced to meet the attack. As the man approached, he stretched out both arms. Multiple ghost images sprang up, and suddenly the illusory image of a huge cauldron appeared and shot forward. A massive boom rang out. The Southern Domain cultivator staggered backward, coughing up blood, his face pale. Luo Chang waved his sleeve and advanced further. More booms filled the air for the space of a few breaths. Finally, a blood-curdling scream could be heard. Blood fountained out from the neck of the Southern Domain cultivator. Only a thin strip of flesh connected it to the body as it tumbled to the ground. Luo Chang slowly lifted his gore-covered right hand and wiped some blood onto his gold mask. The sight was terrifying. Fellow Taoist Wang Lihai, as Dao child of the Wang clan, do you dare to fight with me? Luo Chang cried. His eyes shone brightly beneath his mask as he looked toward the Wang clan cultivators and Wang Lihai. Wang Lihai lifted his head and began to stride toward Luo Chang, his eyes glowing. The instant he began to move, Han Shandao from the solitary sword sect also rose to his feet, then flew into the air toward Black Land's Dao child Su Fei. The appearance of the two of them caused quite a stir among the Southern Domain cultivators. All eyes were fixed on them. This battle was a fight between 4 Dao children. Unless something unexpected happened, their names would rock the world, regardless of who gained victory. The eyes of the Black Land's Dao children, Luo Chang and Su Fei, glistened with concentration. They watched as Han Shandao and Wang Lihai approached. It seemed none of the 4 wanted to make the first move. As far as Luo Chang and Su Fei were concerned, this battle represented the pinnacle of the might of the Southern Domain. No one under core formation could possibly unleash greater power in battle than the Great Circle of Foundation establishment. Therefore, their eyes filled with concentration, and within their hearts burned the fiery desire for battle. Everything was quiet as the crowds looked at the 4 Dao children and waited for this pinnacle of battles to begin. However, even as everyone was paying rapt attention to these 4, suddenly, someone among the throngs of cross-legged cultivators slowly stood up. He wore an azure scholar's robe, and as he rose, he flew up into the air. This was none other than Meng Hao. His appearance caused looks of astonishment to appear on the faces of the tens of thousands of cultivators who surrounded the Dao geyser. It wasn't just them. The 4 Dao children in midair stared at him in surprise. Wang Lihai's eyes came to rest on Meng Hao's clothes. Seeing their azure color, his eyes narrowed, and the image of a person appeared in his mind. Not far off, Han Shandao looked equally thoughtful as he stared at Meng Hao's clothes. Interesting, said Luo Chang with a smile. This fellow Taoist seems to have made his move a bit late, but he seems to have his mind made up. Fellow Taoist Wang, fellow Taoist Han, would you permit me to first slay him? As he looked at Meng Hao, he didn't seem to think much of him. He had seen pictures of all of the famous chosen and Dao children in the Southern Domain, and Meng Hao didn't look familiar to him at all. As such, he came to the conclusion that he wasn't even worth paying attention to. A cultivator like this could be killed, without a second thought by Luo Chang. Without waiting for a response from Wang or Han, Luo Chang flicked his sleeve, turned, and headed directly toward Meng Hao. When Luo Chang attacks, he said with a laugh, he leaves behind only fatal wounds, not injuries. You deserve praise for your courage, so I'll leave your body intact. Seeing all this happen, the surrounding tens of thousands of cultivators frowned. To them, Meng Hao's actions seemed far too impulsive. If anything, it was simply delaying the amazing battle that was about to take place. Who is that? Does he think he can join Dao children's battles? As the discussions were beginning to spread, Luo Chang descended upon Meng Hao. As Meng Hao hovered there in midair, his cold voice suddenly rang out like rolling thunder. You're no match for me, he said to Luo Chang. The person I want to fight, he suddenly pointed, is you. This second you was directed to none other than the skinny azure-masked cultivator who was sitting cross-legged in midair off in the distance. The instant the words came out, the skinny, azure-masked cultivator's eyes snapped open. They glowed brightly as he looked at Meng Hao, his pupils constricted as he recognized him. Meng Hao's words obviously caused an enormous buzz of conversation to rise up among the tens of thousands of southern domain cultivators. Many immediately rose to their feet, looks of disbelief written across their faces. Is he insane? He wants to fight a core formation cultivator with core chi. As the buzz of conversation filled the air, Wang Lihai's eyes narrowed. Moments ago, he was unsure of Meng Hao's identity, but now he had no doubts whatsoever. He took a deep breath. He knew that this person was none other than the faceless Azure hero. Only that mysterious azure-robed man qualified to look down on Foundation establishment and do something that since ancient times was rarely seen in the cultivation world. He was turning everything upside down, issuing a challenge to the core formation stage while in the Foundation establishment stage. And Shandao also took a deep breath. The exact same thoughts were going through his head as were going through Wang Lihai's. Luo Chang laughed loudly. Southern domain cultivators are very interesting. Apparently you aren't familiar with the height of heaven and depth of earth. Your late Foundation establishment, not even Great Circle, yet challenged me. An expression of ultimate ridicule covered his face. He lifted his right hand and waved it toward Meng Hao. I'll leave your corpse intact, Luo Chang said coldly. I'll help you understand the height of heaven and depth of earth. His heart didn't match his expression. He took it seriously. As he waved, a bright beam and illusory cauldron shot toward Meng Hao. Luo Chang's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Liu Chang. Luo is a surname which also means sieve or net. Chang means charge or clash. Su Fei's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Zhu Fei. Su is a common surname which also means gentle or slow. Fei means humble. Chapter 269. He's the faceless Azure hero. Pipe down, Meng Hao said coolly, ignoring the beam and cauldron. He slapped his bag and a simple wooden sword appeared. Gripping the sword in his hand, he swiped it at the beam and the cauldron. The slash split the air, sending ripples and bright white glow. The casual slash contained some great Tao, as if winds of time swept through the ripples. A flying axe within the beam was hit by 60-year time winds. Black spots appeared as it aged, spiritual power decaying. It dropped to the ground within a blink. The wind rushed toward the cauldron, which trembled and distorted. A 60-year time cycle passed. The illusory cauldron dissipated. The wind landed on Luo Chang, gently brushing him. His skin's vitality was carried away. Wrinkles appeared, his face aged beneath the mask. 60 years of life force was sucked out. Weakness filled him, fear covered his face, his body trembled, and he coughed up blood, staggering backward with disbelief. His body trembled and paled. His skin-withered body became emaciated. The mask fell, revealing white hair and an old man's face, shock and dread covering it. Everything was deathly silent. The three azure-masked cultivators suddenly stood up, their eyes filled with serious expressions. On the ground, the tens of thousands of cultivators from the southern domain were silent for a moment. Then a massive hubbub broke out. The other Dao child, Su Fei, subconsciously retreated a few steps, eyes filled with a look of dread as she looked at Meng Hao. Wang Lihai and Han Shandao both took in deep breaths, staring in shock. Their hearts were pounding. A divine ability like this shocked everyone under heaven. Meng Hao had only made one swipe. The axe had been sent into a state of decay, the illusory cauldron had been dispelled, and Luo Chang had lost a 60-year cycle of life. All of it gave rise to great waves of discussion. What magical technique was that? It was that sword. It must be a divine ability from that sword. No wonder he dares to challenge the core formation stage. Who is he? He's wearing azure-colored clothes, don't tell me. As the buzz of conversation filled the air, Dao child Luo Chang stood there trembling, his face pale. His expression was one of thorough confusion. Meng Hao flicked his sleeve and his voice cool said, I've taken a 60-year cycle of time away from you. Now do you understand the height of the heavens and the depth of the earth? With that, he ignored him, focusing his gaze on Wang Lihai and Han Shandao. Wang Lihai looked at him and suddenly said, It seems your excellency is wearing his true face today. I understand that you thoroughly defeated me that day. However, there is still another fight to be had between us in the future. Han Shandao from the solitary sword sect clasped hands and bowed. Faceless Azure hero, sir, I'm much obliged for your pointers before. Their words caused the surrounding cultivators to instantly grow quiet. However, The silence only lasted for the space of a few breaths. Suddenly, a clamor arose which was loud enough to shake the land. What? He's the faceless Azure hero. The faceless Azure hero. He's made a sudden rise to prominence recently. He swept over chosen and suppressed Dao children. So it's him. I wonder what sect the faceless Azure hero is from. Considering how incredible he is, he must be a Dao child. As the noise of the clamor lifted up, everyone stared with burning eyes at Meng Hao. The faceless Azure hero's reputation was just too incredible. It was a mystery that few people within the western region of the southern domain weren't talking about. Luo Chang gasped and retreated several paces. He'd heard of the faceless Azure hero and viewed him as formidable. He couldn't imagine this person was him. Bitterness filled his heart at his decisive defeat. Tens of thousands witnessed the defeat. Black Land's Dao child Luo Chang had lost 60 years in a single blow. A fierce glow sprang up in Luo Chang's eyes as he retreated. Suddenly, he cried out, "Azure-masked elders, please kill this guy." Suddenly, the eyes of the two other azure-masked cultivators began to flicker with killing intent. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever, without even the slightest change. The instant he made his decision to attack, he had anticipated that something like this would happen. Before the echo of Luo Chang's words could die out, Meng Hao's voice could be heard. This time, he spoke to the surrounding tens of thousands of cultivators. Fellow Taoists of the Southern Domain, I am Fang Mu, a simple furnace lord of the Violet Fate sect. A year ago, Black Land's cultivators ambushed me and my fellow furnace lord Joe Deccan in the Barren Mountains. I escaped by a fluke, but I'm not sure if Joe Deccan made it out alive or not. Because of enlightenment from this Tao geyser, my cultivation base has reached new heights. Today, I come to battle my opponent from that day in the Barren Mountains. Fellow Taoists of the Southern Domain, I would like to request that all of you bear witness to this battle. His words rang out like thunder, causing a great stir among the tens of thousands of cultivators below. Furnace Lord, he's actually a Furnace Lord from the East Pill Division. Fang Mu, I remember. A year ago there was a new Furnace Lord in the East Pill Division named Fang Mu. He's Fang Mu, a Furnace Lord. The cultivators were in an uproar as they looked at Meng Hao. Great waves of astonishment filled their hearts. The name of the faceless Azure hero already caused their hearts to shake, but what was even more shocking were the words Furnace Lord. The glittering eyes of all the cultivators were now glued onto Meng Hao. No wonder he didn't kill any of the heroes that he challenged in battle. Grandmaster Fang Mu was doing it all to gain enlightenment. He had to attack, but he's an alchemist and didn't want to make enemies. Therefore, he restrained his killing intent. This is an alchemist of our southern domain. This is a true chosen cultivator of the southern domain. Amidst the uproar, Black Land's Dao child Luo Chang's face suddenly changed. He stared blankly at Meng Hao, his mind reeling. Meng Hao's identity was causing a huge commotion amongst the crowd, but it was completely rocking his mind and heart. Next to him, Su Fei was also panting and looking at Meng Hao with an expression of disbelief. The three azure-masked cultivators had grim expressions in their faces. Two of them, not the skinny one, were frowning. Intense killing intent poured from Meng Hao's eyes, and his gaze shifted to the skinny, azure-masked cultivator. My battle today is with this man. If anyone interferes, if any other Black Lands cultivators participate, then I request all the fellow Taoists from the southern domain to stop them. Wang Lihai's eyes glittered, and he immediately said, "The Wang clan of the southern domain will bear witness to this battle. If the Black Lands cultivators interfere, then they will make an enemy of the entire Wang clan. The solitary sword sect of the southern domain will bear witness to the battle. If a second Black Lands cultivator makes a move, they will make an enemy of the solitary sword sect. The Golden Frost sect of the southern domain will bear witness to the battle. If any Black Lands cultivator dares to join the battle, the Golden Frost sect will be forced to interfere. The Blood Demon sect of the southern domain will bear witness to the battle. The Black Civ sect of the southern domain will bear witness to the battle. The Song clan of the southern domain will bear witness to the battle." One after another, voices rang out without end. The tens of thousands of cultivators were no longer sitting cross-legged. They were all standing, glaring up angrily at the Black Lands cultivators. All the clans, all the sects, their voices rang out, melding into a roar that shook heaven and earth. It was like an endless thunder. The cultivators here were all of the foundation establishment stage. However, they represented countless sects and clans of the southern domain. Clearly, they could influence the attitude of their sects as a whole. Considering that they were all giving voice to the same opinion, the Black Lands cultivators were now pushed into a very narrow corner. One mistake could give rise to a great war between the southern domain and the Black Lands. Luo Chang's face twisted and body trembled. Su Fei panted nearby, other black-robed cultivators nervously rotating their cultivation bases. The faces of the three azure-masked cultivators immediately changed. The skinny cultivator had a grim expression underneath his mask. He stepped forward and said, "This is a personal matter between this kid of the junior generation and I Yang. Outsiders need not interfere. It has nothing to do with the Black Lands. Fang Mu, you pup, it seems you're seeking to die. Very well, I shall help you." His voice rang out, causing the surrounding Black Lands cultivators to back up. In an instant, the only people floating in the air were him and Meng Hao. This was their battleground. "You've thought about how to die," the azure-masked cultivator said coolly. Killing intent radiated from his eyes as he lifted his hand, and light yellow core chi appeared. It transformed into a sword image. Meng Hao watched with concentration. This was crucial. His cultivation base rotated along with that imperceptible chi, seeming to thirst for his attack to grow stronger and lead to breakthrough. This chapter was sponsored by Anonymous. Chapter 270, Battling Core Formation. The azure-masked cultivator, who was surnamed Yang, glanced coldly at Meng Hao. Meng Hao had left a deep impression on him. It was extremely shocking that not only was he not dead, he had actually made a breakthrough in his cultivation base. It left the man with an uncomfortable sense of danger. It was humiliating. A late Foundation establishment cultivator caused danger. Beneath his mask, the man's face was grim. He began to move forward. His foot descended, sending ripples and roaring sound through the hearts of tens of thousands. Only the two were in the air. His step reverberated throughout the area, aimed at Meng Hao. Meng Hao's face was the same as ever. The roaring inside him wasn't bothersome in the slightest. His 8 perfect Tao pillars rotated with power of the violet chi from the East technique, causing Meng Hao's body to glow with a violet aura. It spread throughout him and out, causing his azure garment to suddenly appear violet-colored. Violet glow filled the air around him, making him appear extraordinary. Violet chi from the East. That's the Violet Fate Sect's violet chi from the East. Furnace Lords from the East Pill Division can cultivate that. He really is Fang Mu. Everyone was completely focused on what was happening. Before, there had been some who suspected Meng Hao wasn't who he said he was. However, the buzz of conversation washed away any such doubts. After seeing the violet glow, everyone was certain about his identity. "You're back looking to die," the azure-masked cultivator snorted coldly and advanced. His right hand flashed an incantation and pointed. This wasn't their first battle. A year ago had left an impression. Combined with the sense of danger, he felt uneasy and attacked with full force. Phoenix howls filled the air. 10 massive dragons appeared, followed by 10 illusory phoenixes. Their appearance shook everything, carrying frigid iciness. He waved, sending them toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao took a deep breath. His cultivation base roared into action. His perfect Tao pillars fully rotated, emitting boundless power to fill his body. The violet glow around him grew thicker, and his eyes filled with the desire for battle. This battle was of utmost importance, the key to completing the Great Circle. A year's waiting. He'd been defeated a year ago, now he would turn the tables and battle core formation. His right hand shot up, slicing 4 fingers with his thumb. Blood flowed as he extended his hand forward. 5 illusory fingers appeared in a blink. Blood-colored vision and roaring as the fingers formed into the blood palm. The blood-colored palm emanated reddish glow and shocking killing aura. Filled with 8 Tao pillars, power and violet aura, it shot forward with indescribable speed. A roaring like that of thunder filled the sky. At the same time that the palm appeared, Meng Hao bit down on the tip of his tongue and spit out some blood. The blood drop shot out to merge into the blood palm. "Blood palm," bellowed Meng Hao. His left hand lifted up and he quickly formed another massive blood palm, this one of a left hand. It also shot forward. The 2 blood palms filled with blood merged together. They reached the phoenixes and dragons, slamming into each other. A shockingly loud boom rattled out like thunder. The 10 dragons and 10 phoenixes howled. They were formed from the power of a core formation cultivation base and were virtually invincible. Meng Hao's first blood palm immediately disintegrated. As it did, the blood from Meng Hao's cultivation base burned away. The second blood palm roared in. There was a massive boom as 6 dragons and 7 phoenixes were exterminated. 4 dragons and 3 phoenixes screamed toward Meng Hao, submerging him. The roaring dissipated, ripples ceased, calm returned. Meng Hao emerged with violet light rising to the heavens. A bit of blood seeped down the corner of his mouth. His eyes were violet-colored, as were all the veins in his body, and a powerful aura emanated from him. Meng Hao had stood against a core formation cultivator's technique with his own power. Violet pupil transformation flowed rapidly through Meng Hao's body, healing his injuries. Meng Hao didn't care about the injuries, of course. The desire for battle grew even stronger within his eyes as he stared at the azure-masked cultivator. The man's face was unsightly beneath the mask. His opponent wasn't ordinary and had increased in power, but the increase was shocking. This first exchange of blows between the two opponents caused the surrounding southern domain cultivators to reel in shock. This included Wang Lihai, Han Shandao, and all the other chosen. Foundation establishment battling core formation. His abilities matched a core formation expert without core chi. Before, people thought he had a treasure, but the shocking scene had nothing to do with treasures. It was a magical technique. This clearly showed that he was by no means weak. He had directly resisted a core formation cultivator's magical technique. Granted, his opponent hadn't employed core chi, but even so, Meng Hao was clearly qualified to challenge core formation. He advanced, lifting his right hand. The violet light from his body flowed toward it, coalescing into a blinding violet sun. His eyes glittered as his 8 Dao pillars' power catalyzed violet chi from the east. As violet pupil transformation healed him, he unleashed his most powerful technique. Violet Chi Guillotine. 1. Meng Hao learned the Violet Chi Guillotine, along with another technique called Violet Pupil Transformation, in Chapter 242. The Chi transformed into a long violet blade. It expanded, trailing violet smoke, seeming to take all his violet aura. It grew dozens of meters long and shot forward at indescribable speed. Insignificant skill, the azure-masked cultivator said coldly. You overestimate yourself. Being pestered by a Foundation establishment cultivator was humiliation. He'd felt shame from the battle's start. He was filled with intense desire to kill Meng Hao. A light glittered in his eyes as core chi appeared. Light yellow light roiled out with the indistinct shape of a sword, emitting fierce aura and icy coldness. Even as Meng Hao's violet chi guillotine approached, the azure-masked cultivator's core chi exploded out. The sword shot forward, transforming into a blinding beam of light. It slammed into the violet chi guillotine, and a booming roiled out. Violet chi trembled and collapsed. The blinding sword continued toward his head. His pupils constricted as danger filled him. As the sword shot toward him, a greenish-blue shield appeared, his protective jade pendant. A boom filled the air as the azure-masked cultivator's core chi sword collapsed into pieces. The azure-masked cultivator grunted and slapped his bag. A black flying sword appeared. He tossed it up, fusing it with core chi, which diminished momentarily before restoring. In terms of stances, how could I possibly meet defeat a second time? The man's eyes filled with ridicule as he waved his right hand. From the core chi above his head, the black sword shot out toward Meng Hao. Let's see how long your nascent soul blood can resist. The sword emitted a piercing shriek. Suddenly, a massive boom filled the air and Meng Hao was shoved backward. His expression never changed, though. In fact, his desire for battle grew even more intense. Meng Hao could sense the chi that would help him break through. It burst with activity, rotating faster and faster. He could sense his 9th Dao pillar's imminent appearance. Almost there, but not quite enough battle chi. His eyes shining brightly as he watched the flying sword slam into the shield, which then filled with cracks. As he retreated, he slapped his bag of holding to produce a large collection of bottles. The azure-masked cultivator's eyes were grim as he sent another sword into the shield. He wanted it broken quickly, already wasting several specially crafted swords. Once your protection is gone, you're dead. One slash will finish you, he said coldly, his voice filled with killing intent. Chapter 271, Soul Emergent Sword Slay the Lone Star. The boom echoed 50 kilometers in every direction. The tens of thousands of southern domain cultivators looked on in shock. Even the screen above the Dao geyser flickered. As the boom reverberated, cracks filled the shield surrounding Meng Hao. It collapsed into countless pieces, drifting away. A bit of blood seeped out of the corner of the azure-masked cultivator's mouth. Destroying Meng Hao's nascent soul blood shield had cost him 6 life swords and his core chi. It would recover in half an incense stick's time. However, the azure-masked cultivator didn't care. Without the nascent soul blood's protection, Fang Mu could be killed easily. His core chi would recover in half an incense stick's time. In his opinion, without the nascent soul blood, Fang Mu would have been easy to capture. "Let's find out how long you can last against me without that blood," laughed the azure-masked cultivator. He slapped his bag of holding to produce what appeared to be a ball made of intertwined hair. He flung it out with his left hand. "Distilled fiends." As the man's gruff voice rang out, the hair suddenly expanded into a massive black net, 50 meters wide. It emanated an intense killing aura that shot up into the sky. In the middle of the net could be seen multiple phantom souls. Their faces were filled with agony, and they emitted soundless wails. A buzz of conversation immediately arose among the tens of thousands of southern domain cultivators. It seemed many of them recognized the treasured item which the azure-masked cultivator had produced. Black Land's Distilled Fiends Net, one of the three great treasures of Black Land's cultivators. Each is different based on the creator's personality, and each has different power. It's a Black Land's Distilled Fiends Net, living people distilled into souls, sealed in hair, woven into a net. A sinister treasure, impervious to all poisons under heaven. I can't believe that Black Land's cultivators really are all so cruel and merciless. That net must have over 1,000 souls in it. Meng Hao's eyes narrowed. The killing aura of this distilled fiend's net rose into the sky, and the silent screams of the souls filled the air. Looking at it, Meng Hao felt as if his own soul were about to be torn from his body. So, he thought, he's using this treasure to counter my Tao of poison. He lifted his right hand and waved it in front of him. The pill bottles in front of him flew out and then exploded in midair. Massive quantities of colorful mist poured out, filling the surroundings. Anyone who looked at it would be immediately shocked. It clearly contained multiple types of poisons. As the mist roiled out, the distilled fiend's net flew through the air. As soon as the two ran into each other, hissing sounds emanated from the poison mist. In the blink of an eye, the souls within the distilled fiend's net began to consume the mist. At the same time, the net began to spread out, surrounding Meng Hao. The azure-masked cultivator's hands flashed with relentless incantation gestures, and he would occasionally gesture with a finger. The souls within the distilled fiend's net shrieked and consumed the poison mist. At the same time, the net drew closer to Meng Hao, threatening to envelop him completely. The azure-masked cultivator's eyes were cold. There were many magics that he could use, but he had opted for the distilled fiend's net. This was not only because he feared Meng Hao's poisons, but even more so because he wanted him to die screaming. The more miserable and shrill his cries, the more his own anger could be sated. The mist was rapidly diminishing, and the distilled fiend's net was shrinking. It was now less than 50 meters away from Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. He could sense the cultivation-based breakthrough chi inside of him growing larger as he battled against core formation. It circulated rapidly, and seemed that at any moment his ninth Tao pillar would appear. Just a little bit more, he thought, his eyes glittering coldly. He lifted his right hand to produce one of several poison pills that he had concocted after becoming a furnace lord in the East Pill Division. Poison Flame Pill. Meng Hao crushed the pill between his fingers and waved his hand. A green flame sea immediately roared up. At the same time, he flung out his left hand, sending more pills soaring into the air. When they hit the green flames, they melted. In the blink of an eye, they transformed into a blue water screen. This was sourceless alchemy water. Water and flame cannot coexist. However, the water screen and the flame sea both seemed to be working in unison. They spread out with a roar, making a beeline for the distilled fiend's net. Sourceless water set spirits adrift. Meng Hao's eyes glittered as the sourceless alchemy water reached the distilled fiend's net. It gently passed through the net, covering the souls within. They seemed to stick to it as if it were glue, seemingly about to be pulled completely away from the net. As the souls were torn away, the green flame sea landed, its heat radiating out in all directions. The azure-masked cultivator reacted in the blink of an eye. Eyes narrowing, he immediately made an incantation gesture with his right hand and then lifted his finger. At the same time as it descended, Meng Hao produced 10 black medicinal pills from his bag of holding. These medicinal pills emitted no medicinal aroma, and in fact emitted a shocking aura. The original pill had not been concocted by Meng Hao, but rather one from Xianxia. Furthermore, they had not been concocted by a scarlet-robed alchemist of the World Pill Division, but rather a rank higher than that, a golden-robed alchemist who could concoct magic pills. The name of the pill was Magical Thunder Peel. Xianxia had possessed one, gifted by his master for study. Meng Hao realized its power and made copies. His eyes shone with a cold light as he waved his arm, sending the magic thunder peel pills flying out. "Thunder, detonate!" he cried suddenly. As his voice echoed out, the 10 magic thunder peel pills suddenly exploded. A massive roar filled the air, which transformed into a shocking attack. The distilled fiend's net began to tremble, and the souls began to emit miserable shrieks. Thunder magic can restrain all types of apparitions. Therefore, the magic thunder peel pill was not very useful against cultivators, but was incredibly powerful when used on souls. "Fang Mu, how dare you!" The azure-masked cultivator's heart sank. He had spent many years refining the distilled fiend's net. It was only one step away from turning from a net into a flag, whereupon it would be even more powerful. The net contained 1,000 souls and normally couldn't be damaged by a magic thunder peel. However, Meng Hao had led with a poison mist, then poison water, then poison flames, and finally the thunder magic. Because of all of these reasons, the souls in the distilled fiend's net were being destroyed. The azure-masked cultivator's eyes were filled with veins of blood. A vicious aura blazed from his eyes. He lowered into a half-horse stance, then stretched his arms down. He lifted his head and then stretched his arms out as if he were grasping something. Then he suddenly straightened up. "Shade horses, charge!" Everything grew dark, and gasps could be heard from the tens of thousands of surrounding spectators. Suddenly, in front of the azure-masked cultivator, 9 black horses appeared. A pulsating aura of death emanated off of them. Their flesh decomposing, they were clad in armor and emanated damp coldness. They raised their heads and neighed as they charged toward Meng Hao. There were only 9 horses, but as they charged, it seemed more like an army of 10,000 horses. In fact, it seemed that riding atop the shade horses were intangible specters. A cold wind screamed out, blasting across Meng Hao. His eyes flickered. Even as the distilled fiend's net dissipated around him, he squinted his eyes. He sensed imminent danger, yet the chi strand within him grew more active, rotating fiercely. Breakthrough was near. From what he could tell, he was only half a step away from the breakthrough. He knew that the only way to take that half step was to fight. Without hesitation, he advanced forward. As the 9 shade horses approached, he lifted his hands, 5 fingers splayed and struck forward. Coldness radiated out of his eyes. 8th Demon Sealing Hex. Meng Hao could suddenly see ghost images springing up everywhere. Everything was overlapping, as if the entire world were filled with duplicates of itself. The ghost images folded in toward the approaching shade horses, pushing down onto them. The shade horses suddenly stopped moving and began to tremble. Previously, their eyes had been red and blank, but now they filled with fear. They trembled so hard that it seemed they might disintegrate at any moment. The sight of it struck fear into the heart of the azure-masked cultivator. "Damned Foundation establishment pup, time to end this," fury filled the azure-masked cultivator's mind. No matter how he attacked, he couldn't kill his opponent. The battle was being witnessed by the tens of thousands of cultivators, making the whole thing incredibly embarrassing. His killing intent grew more intense, and he suddenly raised his right hand and pushed down onto his forehead. His eyes began to glow with a crimson light. "Core Soul Emergent Slaying," he said suddenly. The indistinct image of an orange core began to coalesce out of the top of his head. "Soul Emergent Sword, slay the Lone Star." The azure-masked cultivator's body trembled, and he closed his eyes. The instant he did, a fissure appeared on the orange core, from which emerged a golden glow. It coalesced into a flying dagger which shot toward Meng Hao. Atop the dagger was the faint image of a soul, which had the appearance of none other than the azure-faced cultivator. This sword disdained all defenses. It looked down on all magical techniques. Its power came from shocking killing intent. Once it emerged, it demanded a slaying. This chapter was sponsored by Alan Tam. Chapter 272, Massive Cultivation Base Breakthrough. This sword rocked heaven and earth. This sword shook tens of thousands of cultivators. This sword embodied the azure-masked cultivator's fury. His desire to kill Meng Hao could grow no higher. Danger had haunted Meng Hao since the battle's start. Yet the moment the sword appeared, the chi strand inside him grew rapidly. Soon he would be able to experience a cultivation base breakthrough. Currently, Meng Hao had a very strong feeling that if he could stand up to this attack, then he would be able to have that breakthrough. The ancient battle chi would give rise to his 9th perfect Tao pillar. He would be the first cultivator in ages to be of the great circle of perfect foundation establishment. Determination filled Meng Hao's eyes. The soul sword raced toward him, splitting the air. Meng Hao stretched out both arms. His eyes crimson, he called. 5 clones of blood, come. 5 blood-colored figures suddenly appeared around him. These were none other than the 5 blood clones Meng Hao had created. Ghost images sprang up as they transformed into their clone essence, the meat jelly skin. They transformed at almost the same instant as the azure-masked cultivator's soul sword arrived, filled with killing intent. Instead of slamming into Meng Hao's forehead, it hit the meat jelly skin. A massive explosion filled the air. The 5 pieces of meat jelly skin were sent flying back, undamaged but unable to control the force of the impact. They slammed into Meng Hao, causing him to spin backward like a kite with its string cut, blood spraying from his mouth. The soul sword whistled through the air, looking a bit dimmer than before. Obviously, the obstruction of the meat jelly skin had shaken it. However, it was nothing more than a pause before it once again shot toward Meng Hao. Though Meng Hao coughed up more blood, everything happened as he predicted. He retreated and drew out the wooden time sword, no time to wipe his mouth. A ferocious look covered his face, and intense killing intent radiated out. This battle seemed evenly matched, only he knew one mistake meant instant death. It was astounding that he had been able to last as long as he had. The most critical aspect of the fight had of course been when he used the Jade pendant to nullify his opponent's powerful core chi. The resulting temporary weakness in his opponent was what had allowed Meng Hao to hold on to this point. The resulting life-or-death battle was causing the cultivation base breaking chi inside him to grow. Every attack he had made caused the chi strand to grow many times faster than it had in his previous fights with Foundation establishment. Therefore, he would not flinch from this battle. The time sword had arrived in the southern domain. Exactly how powerful it was, Meng Hao wasn't sure. It had whittled away some of Luo Chang's longevity, but he was merely a Foundation establishment cultivator, and Meng Hao had expended almost no effort in the attack. He had not even attempted to draw more power out of the sword, but now he was up against core formation. Meng Hao's eyes filled with decisiveness. The entire battle now rested upon this treasure. Lifting the wooden time sword, he focused completely. He was the sword and the sword was him. Body and sword moved as one. Meng Hao had complete faith in the sword. He had faith that the sword could turn the tide of death. This faith was not fanciful. Entering the sword, he underwent spontaneous enlightenment that birthed faith. The wooden sword emitted no brilliant light or shocking ripples. It rose and slashed toward the incoming soul sword. The azure-masked cultivator's soul sword shook. For the first time in the battle, the azure-masked cultivator sensed a profound feeling of danger. As he floated there within the soul, he suddenly thought about what had happened to Dao Child Luo Chang. And yet he didn't retreat. He was unwilling to retreat because if he didn't slay Fang Mu, then it would be hard to recall the soul. So he pushed forward at top speed, slamming into the descending wooden time sword. No roar, no boom. A shocking wind of time rose, filling the area, a song of ages, a glow of life like illusion. Archaic chi melded with the surroundings. As the swords collided, the azure-masked cultivator's soul shrieked, a sound only he could hear. He suffered no wound, but indescribable pain filled him. His life force was injured, life itself had been sucked away. Suddenly, he was incomparably weak. The feeling of weakness filled him with unprecedented fear. It only took an instant for him to realize that the wooden time sword had caused him to lose a full 60-year cycle of longevity. This was the result of only one blow of the sword. Before a second blow could land, the azure-masked cultivator's soul let out a fierce shout. The soul sword shot forward, stabbing completely through Meng Hao's chest and then disappearing in the resulting shower of blood. Blood sprayed from Meng Hao's mouth, his face turning pale. He became a beam of colorful light, falling toward the Dao geyser and the glowing screen. When the soul sword disappeared, the azure-masked cultivator's body shook. Blood sprayed from his mouth as his eyes opened. His body aged as he staggered backward, coughing more blood. His mask fell off, revealing a pallid, bloodless face. In core formation, he had never met anyone as difficult to slay as Meng Hao. He panted, face pale. He didn't lower his guard and prepared to charge again. This was because he knew the sword had not pierced through Meng Hao's heart. At the last minute, Meng Hao had moved to the side, causing the sword to miss the vital spot. Suddenly, shock covered his face as he looked toward Meng Hao. Below, the tens of thousands of cultivators also looked shocked. They saw everything that had happened, including the sword piercing Meng Hao through the chest. Now, though, their eyes went wide with disbelief. All eyes were fixed on Meng Hao. He had been falling, but then he stopped in midair. He floated there, and when his eyes opened, they radiated an icy glow. His wound was serious, and even the restorative power of the violet pupil transformation wouldn't enable him to recover in a short period of time. What was so shocking to the unmasked cultivator and the other tens of thousands of cultivators had nothing to do with that. What shocked them to core was that Meng Hao was currently floating, in the exact same position as the figure on the glowing screen. Their bodies were superimposed. A powerful feeling surged through Meng Hao. He sensed the qi strand exploding with power to cause breakthrough. This explosive qi caused incredible shock to fill all hearts, that of the unmasked cultivator, Wang Lihai, the Black Land's Dao children, and everyone else. A cultivation-based breakthrough in the midst of battle. As shock ran through everyone, Meng Hao took a deep breath. He had waited for this moment, willing to battle core formation to achieve it. Finally, the ancient battle qi erupted within him. The ninth Dao pillar began forming with indescribable speed. 10%, 20%, 30%. He didn't need the approval of heaven and earth to form his ninth Dao pillar. However, he needed spiritual energy. At the moment, the 8 Dao pillars within his body were emitting shocking amounts of spiritual power, all pouring into the ninth Dao pillar. 40%, 50%, 60%. His aura grew increasingly powerful. His body emitted blinding violet light that shot skyward. A mighty pressure pressed down onto the Foundation establishment cultivators, shaking their minds and spirits. Their cultivation bases became unstable, their Dao pillars trembled. Meng Hao's presence caused all other Dao pillars to bend in worship. It seemed as if Meng Hao were the sovereign of the Foundation establishment stage. The massive pressure he exuded seemed capable of causing the rest of Foundation establishment to be nothing more than mortals. The aura grew more and more intense, causing everyone's minds to reel. The heart of the now unmasked cultivator filled with an intense feeling of danger. I can't let him get any stronger, he thought, his face twisting. Damn it, he's in the midst of the Dao geyser enlightenment. Without hesitation, he began to fly toward Meng Hao at top speed. However, as he neared, a roaring sound suddenly rose up from the Dao geyser. In front of the shocked tens of thousands of cultivators, it erupted with boundless spiritual energy. Massive amounts of it shot up, and the nexus of the eruption was none other than Meng Hao himself. Immediately, the unmasked cultivator was forced to stop. He didn't dare to approach, and could only watch as Meng Hao was enveloped by the spiritual energy and then disappeared. Fang Mu gained enlightenment. The Dao geyser only erupts with spiritual energy when someone gains enlightenment. But it's erupting with so much spiritual energy. When Li Shiki advanced to the core formation stage, there was only about 30% as much spiritual energy as this. It was the same with Li Dai. Fang Mu. Just what stage is he breaking through to? There's so much spiritual energy. The tens of thousands of cultivators were in an uproar as they watched the spiritual energy exploding out, and then pouring into Meng Hao's forming Dao pillar. It seemed as if this spiritual energy no longer belonged to heaven and earth, but to Meng Hao himself. 70%, 80%, 90%. Finally, 100%. Yet as the ninth Dao pillar completed, shock ran through Meng Hao. He thought everything was over, felt unprecedented power. Then, a look of shock and disbelief filled his face as he noticed that the spiritual energy coursing through his body was actually forming. A 10th Dao pillar. Chapter 273, 10th Dao pillar form. 9 was the ultimate number in heaven and earth, but 10 was perfect. Meng Hao's mind and spirit trembled. In all ancient records, he had never read of a 10th Dao pillar in Foundation establishment. Even in ancient times, cultivators had no more than 9. Because of the change in the heavens, the path of the qi condensation stage had been broken, making the 10th level of qi condensation disappear. That information was recorded in the ancient records. However, there was no such information about a 10th Dao pillar. As a furnace lord of the East Pill Division, he had combed through ancient records, seeking clues about the ancient Dao of alchemy. He had browsed through vast amounts of the Violet Fate Sex records. Despite all of that, he had never encountered any information regarding a cultivator with a 10th Dao pillar during Foundation establishment. And yet Meng Hao could clearly sense a 10th Dao pillar was now forming. Only Meng Hao was able to sense this 10th Dao pillar. Anyone else would be unable to. In much the same way that no one could sense which cultivator the nascent soul blood he possessed came from, Meng Hao made sure that no one could pick up any clues about his Dao pillars. The only thing people could see was the increasing amount of spiritual energy erupting from the Dao geyser. It showed no sign of lessening. It continued to envelop Meng Hao, and he continued to absorb it. As he absorbed the spiritual energy, the outline of the 10th Tao pillar grew clearer. 10%, 20%, 30%. Tao pillar energy roared within him, filling him with unprecedented power. He felt as if soaring to the highest heavens. Power, unprecedented power. His spiritual sense increased exponentially, from roughly 250 meters to 500, 1,000. His mind filled with clarity. As spiritual energy poured in, he sensed everything around him with sharper, more detailed perception. This clarity was even deeper than what he had experienced in the moment when he acquired the perfect foundation. Is this the true perfect foundation? He murmured to himself. The world outside of the spiritual energy vortex was not visible, but with his spiritual sense, he could see it clearly. His heart began to race. A feeling of resolve and excitement welled up within him. He took a deep breath, his eyes filled with anticipation and steadfastness as spiritual energy surged into him. He slowly lifted his hand, looking at it. As he closed it into a fist, he felt strength. Unprecedented strength. His blood and flesh seemed to reform, filling with power that shook his mind. This power was so shocking that Meng Hao felt he could tear magical treasures to pieces with his bare hands. Like when he entered the 10th level of Qi condensation, the 10th Tao pillar's power baptized him, transforming his body, making it more suitable for cultivation, turning it into a treasure itself. 1. Meng Hao reached the 10th level of Qi condensation in Chapter 75. Meng Hao felt he could crush all foundation establishment cultivators without magical techniques. Even Tao children and Great Circle Foundation establishment cultivators could be destroyed barehanded. Meng Hao panted. From his entry into the cultivation world, he had thirsted for power, dreaming to stand at the pinnacle. One thing after another had caused him to grow stronger to this day. He clenched his fists. He was striding the path he had dreamed of. Only the strong could tread this path, and now there was no turning back. He could only continue. More spiritual energy erupted from the Tao geyser, inundating Meng Hao, expanding his spiritual sense and cultivation base. The range of his spiritual sense increased, his body grew stronger, and his cultivation base shot upward. His 10th Tao pillar was rapidly solidifying. 40%, 50%, 60%. The surrounding cultivators watched dumbstruck and panting. The spiritual energy erupting from the Tao geyser left them in a daze. It dwarfed the energy seen in any past enlightenment. Especially in the following breaths, the spiritual energy didn't subside but grew even more abundant, as if all of the Tao geyser's power were exploding out. Black Land's Tao children Luo Chang and Su Fei panted in shock. Wang Lihai and the other Southern Domain Tao children also watched on in disbelief. Is he going to reach core formation? It doesn't look like core formation, but the spiritual energy seems without end. It seems like an ordinary core formation cultivator couldn't even match up. Conversations buzzed endlessly among the surrounding cultivators. The unmasked azure-masked cultivator had the most unsightly face. His aged face filled with shock. He could only stare fixedly at Meng Hao's shadow within the dense spiritual energy. The sense of impending crisis grew even more intense. The shadowy figure seemed to transform into something from his nightmares. I can't let him continue, he said, teeth gritted. Ferocity and determination filled his eyes. He lifted his hand to push against his forehead. With a booming sound, the previously dissipated core qi ignited into being again. A sword appeared within the core qi. The unmasked cultivator flashed incantation gestures with both hands. The core qi sword screamed forth toward Meng Hao, still enveloped in spiritual energy. The sword moved with incredible speed, almost immediately reaching the spiritual energy vortex. A massive boom sounded out, but the sword was incapable of penetrating more than a teeny bit into the spiritual energy. The unmasked cultivator was of the core formation stage, but the density of the spiritual energy erupting from the Tao geyser was such that even his core qi sword couldn't pierce through it. The sword was stuck part way into the spiritual energy vortex. It began to tremble, as if it might be swept away at any moment. It was at this moment that Meng Hao's 10th Tao pillar reached 70% completion. His face unsightly, the unmasked cultivator flashed an incantation sign and pressed down on his forehead. He opened his mouth and spat out blood that coalesced into another sword. Core soul emergent slaying, roared the unmasked cultivator, eyes glowing brightly. His right hand formed an incantation gesture and waved forward. His eyes bulged, his body trembled. Ghost images of his own face flickered into existence. his soul. The soul flew out of his body, merging into the blood, solidifying into the form of a blood sword. The sword buzzed, emitting a power seemingly capable of destroying anything. The blood sword shot out to merge with the core chi to form a real sword. The blood was an embryo, the soul was the sword's spirit, and the core chi formed the blade. This was the cultivator's consummate life force sword. It emitted a shocking scream as it pierced into the spiritual energy vortex and headed directly toward Meng Hao. It slowly approached him. Its speed was not great, but it showed no signs of stopping. It seemed it wouldn't stop moving until Meng Hao was dead. It approached at a crawl. 100 meters, 50 meters, 25 meters, 15 meters. Meng Hao closed his eyes. He floated in the midst of the vortex of spiritual energy, his 10th Tao pillar now 80% complete. The unmasked cultivator's body trembled and his face was pale. It seemed as if his life force was being suppressed. A death aura appeared. Despite this, he continued to exert maximum power, using his soul to power the consummate life force sword closer to Meng Hao. The soul within the sword let out a deep howling noise. In the blink of an eye, the sword was now only 10 meters from Meng Hao. The unmasked cultivator could now clearly see Meng Hao floating there, eyes closed. He could also sense something awakening within Meng Hao, something that seemed like an ancient wild beast. No one would interfere in this magical battle. It didn't matter that Meng Hao was at a critical juncture of a cultivation-based breakthrough. It didn't matter that the unmasked cultivator's actions were virtually a sneak attack. This battle was between the two of them, and the two of them alone. The other azure-masked Black Lands cultivators did nothing to assist their compatriot, nor did the Southern Domain cultivators do anything to block him. Within the space of a moment, the sword was 3 meters away from Meng Hao. It glittered coldly, heading directly toward his forehead. Meng Hao's 10th Tao pillar was rapidly congealing. It was now 90% complete. Die! Screamed the unmasked cultivator's soul shrilly. The consummate life force sword emitted a roaring sound as it approached Meng Hao. 3 meters, 1 meter, half a meter. Soon, it was only a few centimeters from Meng Hao's forehead. It was at this moment that an incredible, heaven-shaking roar filled Meng Hao's body. His 10th Tao pillar was now 100% complete. Meng Hao slowly lifted his right hand, clasping 2 fingers down onto the tip of the consummate life force sword, which was only half a centimeter from his forehead. This is the true perfect foundation, Meng Hao murmured to himself. His eyes suddenly snapped open, revealing frigid iciness and shocking killing intent. This gaze contained a cold, callous aura. This gaze was filled with a shocking, threatening glow. This gaze erupted with an unbelievable domineering aura. At the exact same time, Meng Hao could sense something within his bag of holding. Something inside was suddenly calling out with an incredible thirst. This call came from within the blood-colored mask. It was coming from that which Meng Hao previously had been unable to even touch. The flag of 3 streamers. 2. The flag of 3 streamers has been mentioned a few times, including Chapter 130, Chapter 137, Chapter 177. This chapter was sponsored by Graham Kemp and Fong Bui. Chapter 274, The Flag Flies, Destroy the 3 Incarnations. During this explosive moment, all the spiritual energy poured into Meng Hao. It disappeared, completely absorbed. Not a scrap remained. The Tao geyser ceased its eruption and dried up. The Tao projection flickered, then disappeared. The Tao geyser was thoroughly exhausted. The tens of thousands of surrounding cultivators watched on in silence. The Tao geyser, which had been the focal point of such shocking events for the past year in the Southern Domain, dried up and turned into ash, which then disappeared into the air. Nothing remained. Meng Hao had exhausted all the spiritual energy it contained. With no more enlightenment to be gained, it disappeared. Deathly silence filled the air. The cultivators looked on with blank expressions, then erupted into uproar. The Tao geyser is gone. It should have lasted for a few more days, but it's been completely dried up. Just what breakthrough did Fang Mu have? He hasn't reached core formation, yet he's caused the Tao geyser to dry up early. Black Land's Tao children Luo Chang and Su Fei were panting. To them, this visit to the western region of the Southern Domain had been shocking to the extreme. The cause of this shock was none other than a single cultivator. This cultivator, a furnace lord from the East Pill division of the Violet Fate sect. The 2 other azure-masked cultivators watched on, seemingly unaffected. Yet great waves of shock surged through their hearts, not from the Tao geyser drying up, but from Meng Hao's attacks. This was the first time they had witnessed Foundation Establishment battle core formation. While Meng Hao was clearly at a disadvantage, he hadn't suffered defeat. More astonishing, Meng Hao had broken through in battle, rare enough. Even rarer, he now clasped a life force sword between his fingers. A Foundation Establishment cultivator shouldn't even be able to touch such a sword. Is he really an alchemist? This question floated in both their minds. As the conversations buzzed out, the tens of thousands of Southern Domain cultivators stared up at Meng Hao, their eyes filled with a variety of complicated expressions. Meng Hao's expression remained unchanged. Despite the focus of thousands of gazes, his face didn't change. He didn't know how powerful his 10 Dao pillars were, but he knew, before, despite his caution, he was no match for early core formation. Now, things were different. He now faced a core formation cultivator whose longevity and soul were damaged. He wasn't sure he'd win, but this cultivator's internal injuries meant killing him shouldn't be difficult. Cold glow filled his eyes. He pinched down on the sword between his fingers. Power rose within him. His 10 Dao pillars rotated. Unprecedented power flowed through his arms into his fingers. Popping sounds rang out as cracks covered the sword's surface. Within breaths, it collapsed into dust. The soul within it emitted a blood-curdling shriek and then vanished. As the soul vanished and the sword disintegrated, tears of blood ran down the face of the unmasked cultivator. Blood also poured out of his nose and ears as he staggered backward, coughing up a mass of blood. He lifted his pale face, and it was filled with ferocity, appearing to the onlookers to be even demented with insanity. He lifted his right hand to slap his bag of holding. A black statuette appeared. It appeared to be a dragon, and yet not a dragon, like a python, and yet not a python. This was none other than a flood dragon. It had a single horn jutting out of its head and 2 clawed arms on its abdomen. Its body was bluish-black. The instant it appeared, a fiendish aura filled the area, causing the previously sunny sky to fill with dark clouds. A faint cry rose up that seemed to come from ancient times, echoing out to shake the minds of the tens of thousands of cultivators. As the cry echoed out, the ancient flying rain dragon core within Meng Hao's first Dao pillar suddenly seemed to wake from slumber. It began to tremble. A moment later, the air behind Meng Hao began to ripple, and an enormous, illusory ancient flying rain dragon appeared. It glared down at the statue of the flood dragon as if it were looking at food. In ancient times, flood dragons were nothing more than food for flying rain dragons. The phantom image of the flying rain dragon was invisible to the onlookers. Suddenly, the roar of the flood dragon statue seemed to cease. The unmasked cultivator glared at Meng Hao. "One word at a time," he said. "Transform core qi into a flood dragon ancestor. Open a great Dao with cultivation-based blood. Feed this dragon's spawn with the body. Use the soul to give birth to slaughter." The man bit down on the tip of his tongue and spit out a glob of blood onto the statuette. "I draw my power to call upon the flood dragon ancestor." His body trembled as he raised his head to the sky and howled. In an instant, cracks covered the flood dragon statue. Popping sounds filled the air, and the surrounding tens of thousands of cultivators watched as the statuette crumbled to pieces. It disintegrated, and before the countless bluish-black fragments could scatter, a wind sprang up, gathering them together, distorting them, transforming them into the image of a flood dragon. The image was extremely lifelike, and when it appeared, a vast coldness sprang up and spread out. The unmasked cultivator's expression was vicious as he glared at Meng Hao. "Flood dragon ancestor, I request that you slay this man." As soon as the words were out of his mouth, the phantom flood dragon turned. 2 cold dots that resembled eyes appeared on its head. It stared at Meng Hao for a moment, seemingly itching to attack. Suddenly, it sprang into action, shooting directly toward Meng Hao. As it approached, the coldness soared to the heavens. It seemed as if everything around it would be frozen in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it was 300 meters from Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes shone brightly. He didn't retreat or evade. Instead, he took a deep breath, lifted his hand and began to slice his fingers. 5 fingers were soon covered with blood. He closed his eyes, bent down, and stretched his hand out. "Blood Death World," he cried, his voice filled with an aura of blood and gore. The instant the words rang out, his vision turned the color of blood. At the same time, a bloody aura emanated from his right hand, enveloping the surroundings, causing everything within 3,000 meters to turn the color of blood. The flood dragon, too, was enveloped within this world of blood. This unique world was The third magical art from the blood immortal legacy, the one he had previously been incapable of unleashing, the blood death world. As soon as the blood death world appeared, 5 blood phantoms appeared around Meng Hao. These were none other than his 5 indestructible blood clones. A boom filled the air, filling the hearts of the tens of thousands of cultivators with shock. The unmasked cultivator's face was pale white. It goes without saying that the appearance of the blood death world filled his heart with astonishment. This was especially true because the flood dragon, which he previously thought to be incredibly astonishing, was now emitting a miserable shriek as it struggled within the blood death world. It seemed to be fighting against some invisible power that it just couldn't shake off. As its shrieks rang out, Meng Hao slowly straightened up. He began to clench the fist of his right hand. As his fist slowly closed, the blood death world suddenly shrank, seemingly following the movement of his hand. As its borders shrank, they slammed into the shrieking flood dragon, carrying it with them. In the blink of an eye, the blood death world had disappeared, completely shrinking into Meng Hao's fist. A faint aura of blood seeped up from between his fingers. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever. He slowly loosened his fingers, and as he did, chunky bits of bluish-black dust floated off his palm to dissipate in the wind. Gasps could be heard as people recognized the powder as the remnants of the flood dragon statuette. The unmasked cultivator stared at Meng Hao, his eyes filled with fury. Today's battle will end only in your death. The foundation establishment stage is simply incapable of challenging the core formation stage. He lifted his left hand and used his fingernail to scratch 3 bloody streaks onto his face, forming a triangle. Bone was visible beneath the cuts, which oozed blood. The sight was shocking, but the unmasked cultivator showed no signs that it hurt even the slightest bit. He glared at Meng Hao with even more ferocity than before. Hoarse-voiced conversations immediately sprang up among the cultivators below. That's a forbidden technique of the Black Lands, the Yellow Springs 3 Incarnation seal. As the word spread among the cultivators, the unmasked cultivator's sinister voice filled the air. 3 incarnations are carved out within the Yellow Springs, 3 incarnations that can destroy all incarnations. Yellow Springs, 3 incarnation seal. A bizarre aura filled the eyes of the unmasked cultivator. This was his most powerful magical technique. Utilizing this technique would come at no small cost to him, but at the moment he didn't care. The 3 bloody lacerations on his face began to burn, branding deeply into his face. They began to turn into scar tissue, filling his eyes with even more demented ferocity. As the words left his mouth, he raised his right hand toward Meng Hao, then chopped it down into the air. At first, it seemed as if nothing had happened. However, Meng Hao's heart trembled. Meng Hao's gaze was like lightning as he gazed at the unmasked cultivator. His brow was furrowed. He had been able to exterminate the flood dragon because of the might exerted upon it by the flying rain dragon within the blood death world. As such, it had been dispersed when the blood death world dissipated. "Time to end things," he said softly, his brow relaxing. He raised his right hand to smack his bag of holding. Instead of retrieving an object, however, he sent his spiritual sense into the blood-colored mask. It circled around the flag of 3 streamers, which he previously had never been able to use. This was a precious treasure from the blood immortal legacy. As his spiritual sense hovered over the flag of 3 streamers, it began to sway, then suddenly unfurled. It entered his body, filling him with enlightenment. He raised his right hand and then waved it. Behind him, surrounding him in all directions, filling the sky, covering the land, appearing tattered and yet still emitting a power of heavenly might, was 1 streamer from the flag of 3 streamers. It appeared dilapidated and was gray, but stretched out seemingly without end. As it stretched out, the Yellow Springs seemed to dry up, the 3 incarnations were exterminated, everything sank halfway to hell. Chapter 275. The difference between Meng Hao and Fang Mu. Meng Hao hovered in midair, his eyes closed, concealing the blood-filled veins. His mind reeled. He'd never imagined the flag of 3 streamers would unleash such heaven-shaking power. Moreover, this was only 1 streamer. The full flag hadn't unfurled. This was only a shadow projected by his spiritual sense. Yet even this projected power blotted out the sky and covered the land. It filled the vision of tens of thousands of cultivators. Heaven and earth filled with darkness. Heaven and earth split in 2. The flag existed beneath the heavens, an earth of its own, and above the earth a heavenly flag. The world was covered with darkness, spirits faded, the cosmos itself was pitch black. Indescribable pressure roiled out unprecedented calamity filling all hearts. It was impossible to dispel, like an enormous boulder crushing down. The world plunged into deathly silence. A gray aura emanated from everyone present. It curled up into mist, outside which only the fluttering flag was visible. It twisted beneath heaven and earth, stretching seemingly hundreds of kilometers, as if it had replaced the heavens, changed their will. This dilapidated flag used one side to change the heavens, and the other side to change the earth. Time passed, or a moment. The sky returned to normal, the gray mist dissipated. The shocking flag that disappeared without a trace. Only Meng Hao remained floating in midair. No living thing existed alongside him. The Black Land's cultivators remained, as did those from the southern domain. However, the appearance of the undulating flag up in the sky had caused their bodies to tremble and begin to sink down into the ground. In addition to Meng Hao, the only thing left in the sky was a headless corpse which was slowly beginning to fall down to the ground. This corpse was none other than the unmasked cultivator. As of this moment, everything was over. All eyes came to rest on Meng Hao, then astonishment exploded out. The azure-masked Black Land's cultivator is dead. A Foundation establishment cultivator just exterminated a core formation cultivator. This is. How can Fang Mu possess such battle power? He dried up the Dao geyser. What good fortune did he seize? He's an alchemist, a furnace lord of the East Pill Division, but he was able to challenge Dao children. In the future, he'll definitely be the #1 figure of his generation in the southern domain. More importantly, just what magical technique did Fang Mu just use? It's a technique that can slay core formation. Conversations buzzed. The Black Land's cultivators, Luo Chang and Su Fei, were pale-faced beneath their masks. They stared blankly at Meng Hao. Before this battle, they had believed themselves to be chosen of heaven. They truly thought that few people within the Foundation establishment stage in the southern domain could possibly exceed them. At the most, perhaps someone existed who could match them in battle. But now they found that it didn't matter if it were them, or other chosen from the southern domain. They were all simply foils that accentuated the magnificence of Fang Mu. Even if they grew more powerful, even if they could be considered chosen within their various sects, all of them were merely ordinary when compared to Fang Mu. Fang Mu floated like a blazing sun in the sky. He was too bright, dazzling, causing all the surrounding stars to fade. They might be unwilling, they might be unconvinced, but it didn't matter. They had no choice. An inhuman cultivator had appeared in the Foundation establishment stage who could exterminate core formation cultivators. Everyone of his generation had no choice but to be shaken and feel suppressed. Wang Lihai's face was pale, and he stood there silently. Han Shandao shook his head with a bitter smile and sighed inwardly. The Golden Frost sect Dao Child, Song Yunchu of the Song clan, and the others of various clans who considered themselves to be at the peak of Foundation establishment, all looked up at Meng Hao, their eyes filled with deep veneration. They revered him for his cultivation base and his status as a furnace lord. The name Fang Mu would be matchless in the southern domain. He would be a critical element from now on. Fame had come with one battle. All eyes were fixed upon Meng Hao as he floated there in midair. No roars filled the air, only silence. Such silence, such deathly emptiness, usually represents intense fear. The various cultivators' eyes were filled with conflict, shock, reverence, admiration, and envy. Such a variety of looks seemed to transform into a sharpness which circulated around Meng Hao. In fact, if Meng Hao hesitated at all, it seemed like the sharpness might transform into killing. Meng Hao's astonishing power caused many hearts to fill with a disastrous level of jealousy. This was one of the reasons he had chosen to change his appearance so often in the past, and had been so careful to not accidentally reveal himself. If it weren't for the fact that this battle had been key to his breakthrough, then he would never have openly revealed so much about himself. The death of the azure-masked cultivator would not be closely investigated. Neither the Black Land's Dao children nor the azure-masked cultivators would look into the matter too closely, not with Meng Hao at the height of his power, and surrounded by the shocked southern domain cultivators. However, he was in a precarious situation. The looks being cast by many of the surrounding cultivators caused the two azure-masked cultivators' eyes to glitter slightly. Their gazes came to fall on Meng Hao. So did that of Wang Lihai, Dao Child of the Wang clan. His right hand seemed to be resting casually at his side, but only he knew that he was slowly preparing the Wang clan's vermilion bird 3 fingers. Han Shandao of the Solitary Sword sect narrowed his eyes. Even his normally forthright face began to fill with a slightly sinister expression. The Golden Frost sect Dao Child, as well as the chosen from the other sects, had all been defeated by Meng Hao recently. Their eyes began to flicker as they looked at him too. They didn't dare to attack, although if they knew he was Meng Hao, then surely they wouldn't have so many misgivings. The Black Land's cultivators would have none whatsoever and would definitely immediately attack. However, this was Meng Hao. This was Fang Mu, a furnace lord from the East Pill division of the Violet Fate sect. As people grow in life, they form nets to fall back on. To avoid the problems that result from killing someone, you must first sever that person's nets. That is the only way to prevent future consequences. Acting in any other way is equivalent to killing oneself. Before, Meng Hao was only Meng Hao. He had no such nets, and as such, anyone who wished to kill him could simply attack. But now, his identity as a member of the East Pill division was his biggest safety net. Meng Hao gained enlightenment of this when he had first joined the Reliance sect. Having someone to rely on is in fact one of the greatest safety nets that can exist in a person's life. Wang Lihai didn't make a move. However, one of the other Wang clan chosen suddenly took a step toward Meng Hao. That step seemed to fall upon the hearts of the surrounding cultivators. Luo Chang suddenly moved. The two Black Land's azure-masked cultivators also began to advance. Amidst the stifling deathly silence, the seemingly peaceful scene was actually filled with incredible danger. As Meng Hao floated in midair, his closed eyes suddenly snapped open. The instant this happened, the Wang clan chosen stopped in his tracks. Luo Chang also stopped moving, as did the two azure-masked cultivators. Everyone looked at Meng Hao, their looks even more thoughtful than before. His expression was the same as ever, cold and detached. The coldness of his gaze was even thicker than before, and deep within could be sensed an aura of ridicule. Not even the slightest injury could be seen on his body, making it seem as if this wasn't his first time exterminating a core formation cultivator. He spoke, his voice cool. My Dao Geyser enlightenment included a divine ability. As a furnace lord of the East Pill division, I'm unfamiliar with magical battle. Because of the enlightenment's profundity, I lost control. Fellow Taoists from the Black Lands, please forgive me. He waved his hand, his azure robe disappearing and being replaced by a furnace lord's alchemist robe, black, with a faint violet aura glowing within. The sight of it instantly caused everyone to be filled with shock. He floated there in midair, looking coolly about at the crowds of people. It seemed as if an appointed time had arrived. The two azure-masked cultivators gave deep looks to Meng Hao, then turned and transformed into beams of light that shot off into the distance. Apparently, Meng Hao's identity as a furnace lord was their greatest misgiving. It was well known that anyone who trifled with one of Pill Demon's alchemists could arouse the wrath of the entire sect. Luo Chang and Su Fei gave a final glance at Meng Hao, and then departed. The departure of the Black Land's cultivators caused the previously stifling atmosphere among the southern domain cultivators to slowly relax. The pressure eased, and they began to grow excited. Even as everyone began to discuss this Fang Mu, Meng Hao clasped hands and bowed deeply to everyone. Many thanks for your assistance, fellow Taoists, he said. I Fang Mu am very moved. Now I need to deeply analyze and meditate upon my recent enlightenment. Furthermore, I recently received orders from the sect calling me back. Next time you are able, call on me in the Violet Fate sect. I will most happily receive and entertain you. With that, he gave another deep bow. Most of the surrounding cultivators understood that, as a foundation establishment cultivator, it was an astonishing thing to have slain a core formation cultivator. Of course, the divine ability which had appeared was a projection of some magical item that no one had actually seen. Clearly, he had incredibly mysterious magical techniques and divine abilities at his disposal. The confidence instilled by this achievement in battle would give birth to an ever-present confidence. It would help in everything in the future, be it in terms of cultivation or magical techniques. As they digested his words, Meng Hao once again clasped hands to the Dao children of the various sects and clans, thanking them deeply for their assistance. Clearly having no intention of staying behind any longer, he turned into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. Wang Lihai and the others frowned as they watched Meng Hao disappear. They had no choice but to eventually just look away. Now as before, there was no way for them to truly understand the level of Meng Hao's profundity. Because of the Violet Fate sect, it was impossible for them to make any rash moves. They could only sigh inwardly. Meng Hao flew away at top speed. After a day, his face was completely pale and he coughed up blood. His aura was incredibly weak. Gritting his teeth, he found the mountain where he had recently spent time in secluded meditation. He entered the immortal's cave, coughing up more blood, and immediately sat down cross-legged. Popping a medicinal pill into his mouth, he waved his sleeve, sending out a vast amount of poison pills. They immediately turned into a mist which completely surrounded him. This chapter was sponsored by Samex Golan, Victor Mbulangeni, Danius Glebus, and Caleb Gleason.